Out here in the perimeter, there are no stars. Out here, we is stoned, immaculate.
Hello and welcome. This is the C86 show. I'm David Eastaugh. As you know, we love a special guest. This week it's going to be the turn of the bass guitar player, producer, and also lecturer. It's the one and only Mike Howlett, who I spoke to very recently to find out more about life, love, and poetry, and also life in various bands, including Gong. Members of the Police as well, and also went on to produce a lot of hit singles in the late 70s and early 80s with bands such as A Flock of Seagulls, The Alarm, Martha and the Muffins, Orchestral Manoeuvres in the Dark, and also the Comsat Angels. Anyway, you're going to find out about Mike's interesting career and much more. So after several minutes of interesting but casual chat, we get down to the exciting subject of the early formative years. Mike, it's over to you.
Probably kind of hard to say, really, because the Beatles and the Stones when I was like 12 or 13. So I'm born in 1950. So they both had come out around 63, I guess, is when I started getting interested in music in general. Although, I was oddly enough, when I think about it, that I remembered when I was about 10, I think, I asked initially for a glockenspiel for Christmas because I knew my parents wouldn't buy a piano, but I knew it was the same as the piano keyboard, so I wanted to learn how the notes work. And then at Christmas, I knew they wouldn't get me a guitar, but I asked for a ukulele because I knew that a ukulele had the same tuning as the top four strings on a guitar. And then I borrowed a guitar from a friend at school, and I kept it for about a year. And it was time I saved up pocket money and had a paper run and bought my own acoustic guitar with an F-hole acoustic. And then I bought an attachable pickup too, which I stuck on it. And then I figured out how to tap into this old radio that I had that I got. Somehow or other worked out how to get the audio into it. And that was my first amp.
Right.
And then I was listening to Howling Wolf and the blues stuff, Muddy Waters and, Lightning Hopkins. It was, so it was the blues that like that. And partly because you'd read that the Stones and the Beatles were listening to those people as well, and Chuck Berry. And so, that sort of, as they grew up, I was listening to that. But then I got into a band at school that had gigs every weekend. That was, which was great because it meant I could get money as well. But I was about 15, and we were playing basically pop covers, at dances up and down the north coast of Sydney.
Right.
Would have heard on that interview. And we were doing, the top 40 stuff mostly, and so, but it would be, bands like Cream and the Animals, and House of the Rising Sun, and we got to get out of this place and don't let me be misunderstood. So Sunshine of Your Love. All those songs were great, and I think we did Stones covers. I don't think we did any Beatles songs though, but.
Yes, and did you also pick up on those kind of slightly heavier sounds like Pete Townsend and the Who, or sort of the Kinks? Did they come onto your radar? And then sort of a few years later, quite a few years later, that kind of American West Coast sound of Jefferson Airplane and the Doors and people like that, was that kind of?
Yeah, I mean the West Coast stuff didn't get to me initially. I mean, but the Kinks definitely did. And of course, the Who, in my generation, was a great, we played that in my first little bands. And what else? We didn't do much beyond that with the Who at that point. But what then worked really well for me, I mean, I decided, I was doing all that. And then when it came to doing, I was actually always very good at school. I used to be in the top 2 or 3 all through high school. But it came to doing my equivalent A levels, and I remember having one of those conversations that, life changing in a way. But I mean, with my sister, who I was very close to, and she's a year and a half younger, and she said, "So, well, what do you want to do? When you leave school, what are you going to do?" And I said, "Well, I don't know. There's not really anything, any uni courses I really very interested in. They don't do anything that I'm interested in." And she said, "If you could do anything in your life, anything you wanted, what would you do?" And I said, "I'd like to make my living making music." And I remember that verbatim conversation, and that was my reply. And she then said, "Well, let's go and look up ads for bass players."
Right. So your first band, it wasn't The Affair then. This was a sort of bands that you were in before that combo.
That was a band when I was in high school. It was called The Web, funnily enough. I mean, talk about, we were way ahead.
You were way ahead there, actually.
At that point, we were already called The Web. They were called The Web. That was funny. I remember they were a good, competent band, I remember very good guitarists. No, then we saw this ad. Believe it or not, I didn't even know there were ads for musicians that were available. And I answered this ad and went and did an audition for The Affair, as it turned out, who at that time had a residency in what was the biggest nightclub in Sydney. In fact, they used to advertise biggest nightclub in the Southern Hemisphere, which included America. So. And that was amazing because I got the gig and I was almost immediately playing 6 hours a night, 6 nights a week, from 9 in the evening till 3 in the morning. 20 minutes on, 20 minutes off.
My God, it's a bit like, I suppose, the Beatles at Hamburg. You sort of had your apprenticeship in sort of, yes.
You don't get your chops any other way, I don't think. You just go out and do it. But what they were doing, which was really great for me, was that they were really into soul and Motown. And the singer, Kerry Biddell, was a fantastic singer, and she could sing anything. But she was really good. I mean, she was the strangest, kind of skinny, and she had really bad arthritis even in her 20s. And she'd had an accident too, and her face was slightly broken, hard to explain, and not very. But she actually was, I think, quite lovely in her own way. But she had the biggest voice. I mean, she was a tiny little thing, skinny as a rake, but she had this huge voice. And I remember saying to her, I said, "How do you get your voice?" We were doing a Aretha Franklin song. She was belting it. She sounded big, and she said, "It's all about the mouth shape."
Right.
Look at the way I was singing. My mouth, I'm opening it as much as you can humanly do that, and it's true. And she went on to become a very successful session singer. She could sight read music. Her mother was a jazz musician, but she was also an alcoholic, her mother, and that's really why when we then, like a year and a half later, we went into this national battle of the bands, and we won. And the prize was a trip to England, and it cost a lot of money to get to England in those days. I mean,
yes,
a good manager who managed a bigger band in Australia. He said, "Go in this competition." They're doing this. They were doing a new division that year, the vocal division, and so she trained us to sing harmonies. And I mean, I can sing and hold a tune, but I'm not a great singer, but I can hold a tune. And so she got us all singing all these really quite clever backing vocals, and we won. And it was really worth it, But the trouble was that because her mother was this alcoholic, and so off we went to England by ship, which was a great way to come.
Yes, how long did that take?
4.5 weeks.
Oh, right, crikey. God, you really must have got to know each other in that time. Yeah, because I'd been watching the video of your Money Can't Buy Me. Yes, and it's very much of its time. And yes, she is very, very skinny, isn't she, actually? And yes.
Yeah, that's funny how that stuff's out there. I didn't know we did some TV then in those days.
Yeah, if you look at Discogs, it's kind of there with this kind of like clips. I was trying to look at see where you were in the band at this point, actually. So yes, it was a little bit like a Cilla Black, really, isn't she? She's not sort of Grace Slick or Janis Joplin, is she?
Not to look at. She could sing anything. She
Yes.
was really that good. Honestly, there is some recording of her singing a Kailani Kazan song, which I can't remember right now. But yeah, she could sing anything, and she would deliver it really with all the expression and all the power. I mean, respect, by Frank Aretha, that she belted that out. All of the blues stuff.
Did she cover the Sly and the Family Stones sing a simple song as well?
Yeah, we did that. We did Sly. We did Everyday People as well, I think.
Yes, I know. It was a very soul funky group, wasn't it? Really, it was great to see it.
I know. So it was more that got me into Motown than previously. I'd mostly been listening to, as I said, blues and the Stones and the Beatles and the standard British rock pop bands.
So we've been in Australia, because you'd had those three cultural people come over, like Jermaine Greer, Barry Humphries, and then was it the art historian Robert Hughes? Was going to London from Australia a thing that bohemian artistic types did back then? Was that, this is what we've got to do?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the thing is, I wasn't really thinking that way, and I was a little bit later in a way. I mean, David Allen is a classic of that period, because he came over, I think 1961 or 62. I think he came to England, and he fancied himself as a sort of beat poet in the Melbourne kind of beat jazz scene.
Oh yes, a bit of Jack Kerouac there.
Yeah, I mean, so he lands in London, and somehow or other he ended up with this. He got a lodgings in Robert Wyatt's father's house.
Oh, nice.
And that was the chance random thing that got the Canterbury thing happening. So Robert Wyatt was actually played trumpet when David arrived there, and David kind of somehow or other persuaded him to be a drummer, and then they formed Soft Machine. I think they found Mike Rutledge or Kevin Ayres, and that first version of Soft Machine. I mean, that was what David's doing, and it came about through that. But yeah, he came from that, very much that 60s, sort of early 60s beat poet thing, and and then when that all sort of went, he ended up being somehow or other. The story is they played in France. They're very popular in France, Soft Machine. And
oh, right. Was that the Paris protests?
Well, just around that time, just before that, they'd been playing in France, and David said that they wouldn't let him back into England because he was an Australian and it was Australian visa. Now, I don't necessarily. I'm not sure about that, because I never. It didn't used to be a problem. It only became a problem later when we joined the EU, and sort of it became tighter for Australians to come and live in the UK. And I think that generally, it was true of most of the Commonwealth countries that you kind of never had a problem. But whatever, in 1967, 68, he ends up leaving Soft Machine and living in Paris. And at the time of the revolution, and he just says he remembers like getting very stoned and wandering out into the street, and then seeing all these students throwing rocks at all these policemen and the CRS, who are pretty heavy duty riot squad, and thinking, oops, and ducking back into wherever he was living at that point, and mostly not actually manning the barricades at all.
No.
He had got this gathering of musicians around him.
Yes.
Crystallized into the Gong. And
so
eventually Smythe set that.
Yeah, and did and with yours, when you eventually arrived in the UK after being on a ship for 4.5 weeks with the affair, what then happens with you then during that kind of period? What is the scene? What port do you? Well, I don't know. What port do you land in?
The journey was fantastic. I mean, I recommend it to anyone, because we went from Sydney. First stop was Tahiti. We had a 24-hour stopover, and I remember going around the island, and the big thing to see was the 100-year-old turtle, which I still remember this
Well,
ancient turtle.
yes, the ancient turtles. My God, that's magic, actually.
And then the other thing I remember is I'd met this guy, became a really good friend on the boat, and I wish I could find him again. His name was Jack, but we never kept up, and that was 1970, and somehow or other didn't think about it. I was young and wide-eyed, and he'd been on this kind of hippie trail around the world, and he happened to, and how he hooked up with me on the boat, and he happened to have a lump of Nepalese hashish, which was pretty rare even in those days, and especially in Australia, where it was mostly grass anyway. And so we would go and sneak up after midnight to the very front of the boat, where you have to cross this barrier and onto the prow of the boat where you weren't supposed to go, and weaving between these sort of turrets and ports, things that came from the depths of the boat, but right up to the front, and literally like Titanic, we could sit with our feet hanging over the edge with the Pacific Ocean stretching out before us and the moon reflecting off it. I mean, it was just magic. And then getting, smoking some
yes,
Nepalese
I'm watching the stars and the sunset. Yes, 20-year-olds. The sense of freedom must have been in the air.
To finish Tahiti, so that night we go off, round Paveete is the only place you can go, I think, in Tahiti. Then and we went to this nightclub, bar really, and having a drink, and I'm looking at and these quite sexy-looking girls, all dolled up, and one of them's like giving me, the eye and sort of come hither looks, and I said to Jack, I think I might be, getting onto something here, getting lucky. And he said, I think you might want to have a closer look there, Mike. And sure enough, trans dressing was very popular even then.
Yes.
In Tahiti.
Yeah.
And, it certainly wasn't. It wasn't my flavour, and so without Jack being there, I could have got into a very embarrassing situation.
Well, yes, you could have been, very ahead of your time, actually, though. Did you?
I don't know. Maybe I've never left.
It could have been. It could have been the start of a new period.
Way ahead of my time. So then we then, how good is to sail through the Panama Canal? I mean, what a great thing to do, and which is amazing. And it's quite extraordinary because you're sort of at one point you're in all these lakes, and it's quite wide. You can't see the shore at certain points, but mostly you're going through this sort of canal. And I remember very distinctly seeing this building where the lock was, and all across the wall of this particular building was this line of what could only be bullet holes. There had obviously been a few revolutions going on in those days. So we went through the canal, and then we stopped off in Cristobal, which is a tiny little island somewhere on the other side. I think it's Dutch Antilles, and then Curacao, which definitely is Dutch, for 24-hour stopovers, and then to Lisbon for another stopover, and then to beautiful, very exotic Southampton. And how good does it get, really?
Yes, absolutely. So you come to Southampton with the band, and then where do you go from there?
Well, we hired a panel van. Staggered down the gangplank. Believe it or not, I still remember. I had my bass out, but a 4x12 and a bass out head, and we loaded into this panel van, and the guitarist had an ex-girlfriend who had said, well, when you come to England, you can come and stay with me. I've got a flat in Hendon, and while you get yourself settled. And so we did. We drove up, we got off the boat, got in the panel van, drove up what I presume was the M30. I remember being really impressed with the motorway because, we didn't have motorways like that, in Sydney. I mean, in Sydney, you do, around the harbour, there'd be, 4-lane, 6-lane elevated sections. But I mean, a motorway that went from for miles and miles. All the what they called a highway there was like usually a 2-lane road with occasional towns.
Yes.
And that was the Pacific Highway that went 600 miles up to Brisbane. It was I was really impressed at the high level of the engineering, road engineering. The first thing that struck me about this wonderful country.
Well,
Anyway,
absolutely.
so we arrived in Hendon and stayed there, and I in fact stayed in that girl's house for about 3 weeks. And then we rented a flat down in New Cross, of all places. Don't know how. I think it was Kerry who got that organised. And then we all moved there. And meanwhile, I've managed to, talk about happy days. Made three doors up from this house. Lived what turned out to be one of the biggest dope dealers in northwest London. And I remember this knock on the door, and I went and answered the door. And these guys had seen the girls, there's a couple of Australian girls who were living there, were quite cute looking, and invited. They said, "Well, we're having a party on Saturday. You want to come to our place, we're having a big party." And so I went up with a couple of the band. I don't know if the girls came or not, and it ended up being like this strange bunch of middle class English boys, and a guy who ended up being a really very, very long close friend of mine who ended up working for Peter Gabriel, actually,
Right.
kind of managing the whole
Real world.
the whole what's the WOMAD? The
Oh, WOMAD, not Real World.
Sorry?
I said Real World is the studio and WOMAD is the festival, isn't it?
Yes. So he worked for Gabriel doing WOMAD and Real World, but he lived up there, moved up to Box, and was very involved in the whole operation there. I mean, it's all kind of one big operation, really. But yeah, the studio is called Real World, but he and the whole situation is really.
Blimey, so you met him. What's his name?
His name was Phil. God, I'm sorry, I haven't seen you a moment.
Yes, no, that's fine. But look, so he
died sadly about 15 years ago.
Oh,
he married and had children, but he just had an early heart attack out of nowhere. Just didn't wake up one morning, and
oh, geez,
we went up to so they had a great event for him because he was loved by a lot of people up there.
Yes.
I don't remember his name in a minute, but
well, yes, I'll
lovely,
but
lovely. Very
but,
spiritual, very into Mahababa, all that.
Right. So you're in London next to a great dope dealer in New Cross?
Hendon. In Hendon, not Newcastle. No, Newcastle is where the band moved to.
Right.
To Hendon, and ended up moving into another part of Hendon, in a house, a sort of semi that had about 4 bedrooms, and I lived there for the next 3 years.
Right. And then, so was the band just still together doing music, trying to make it? Because you'd done those 2 singles in the late 60s.
No, but this is a stupid thing, right? That Kerry was also, by that point, the partner of the guitarist, Jim Kelly. There we go. It's all coming back to me.
Yes.
Phil Clark, too. Phil Clark was the guy who was who ended up working for Gabriel. Anyway, Jim Kelly was the guitarist, and he and Kerry were an item. And Kerry had said from the beginning, she said, I don't want to do any gigs. We're going to go there for 10 weeks, and then I'm coming home because my mother will get back on the alcohol if I'm not there to stop her.
Right.
Bizarre, so she refused to do any gigs. She said, we're not going to do gigs. We're just coming over for a nice little holiday. The drummer and I were kind of, baffled. And anyway, we worked out and negotiated with the shipping people that we could defer our return tickets because we weren't, we did do some gigs on the boat coming over, but they were not part of the package that we just, just to keep our hand in. Anyway, look, so they went back. The drummer and I stayed and never returned. And but odd. I mean, I don't know why or how. And the guitarist Jim Kelly went back and formed probably this was still Australia's best known and best most successful prog rock band called Crossfire. And he was a very good guitarist. You know, he could play all the, very jazzy. We used to go and see all the jazz people coming to town, and we shared a flat for a long time in Australia before I came over. But yeah, it's
Right.
so sad. I saw him when I was living in. I went back and spent 5 years in Brisbane, 2009 to 2014, and he was by this time a professor teaching guitar down at the coast at a university called University of the Southern Cross, which is sort of quite near Byron Bay, and had a lot of the kids of hippies would go there. But he was doing a very sort of serious jazz guitar course there.
Right. And that's Jim Kelly.
Sorry?
And that's Jim Kelly.
Jim Kelly, yeah. Australians will know him. He became quite well known in the music world anyway, as and that band was very well known as probably Australia's sort of premier prog rock band.
Right. Well, there you go.
So, yeah, I stayed on, and after 3 weeks, my £10 I arrived with was starting to run low.
Well,
And I
quite.
was walking down Oxford Street, and I saw this bloke with long ginger hair down to his waist, and in a white coat and a long ginger beard. I mean, he definitely looked like Gandalf. And he was selling ice cream from a barrow at the side of the road. And I went up to him and I said, "How do you get a job doing this?" and he turned out to be a lovely guy called Ray Dash. He'd been the Labour candidate for Brighton in the 1966 general election. I saw all the promotional leaflets and stuff. And he had a wife and kids, but by this time he'd taken acid and dropped out, and was now a kind of jazz buff, and had a black girlfriend who was a singer, and he was making good money selling ice cream.
Yes.
And he'd come back and see me at 6 o'clock, and I'll take you down to meet the governors. So I go back and meet him. And so I followed him back down to Shelton Street in Covent Garden. And there, nowadays, of course, it's all sort of body shop and fancy, aromatherapy and
Yes.
expensive. But then it was literally a back street which had these big sliding garage doors, and you slid back one of these big garage doors, and there were like 30 freezers on wheels. They were these things, and they had posts and a sign up above saying 99 flake, and a little perspex, covered with a sliding door, which you kept the flakes, and you kept the cones, of course.
Yes.
Next morning, I'm out there on Oxford Street, opposite Selfridges, selling ice cream.
Sort of being a trader, being a hustler. Yes, I like that fact that
£10 a
an
day.
ex-politician had taken acid and then sort of became an ice cream seller. Sometimes you wonder if a lot more politicians should go that route, really, after their moment of fame, really.
Yeah,
You can think of quite a few you just think, the Kool-Aid acid test would have been quite good. What would have they come and... Liz Truss, you could just imagine it, really, couldn't you, trickling out? Yeah, so you were an ice cream, but what about the music side at this stage? Were you still...
Well, no, I agree that it took a while. I did that for the summer. I was making great money, and so much so that I was able to buy a ticket to the Isle of Wight festival, and a tent and a sleeping bag, and I had some mates I made who were going to go to it, and so we went down, got on the ferry to Isle of Wight, and went up to the festival. And I remember seeing Jimi Hendrix from the top of the hill.
Blimey.
But, mind you, the acoustic, the systems weren't as good as they are nowadays. And also, it's a very strong crosswind, and it kind of helped in a way because it was making it all phase in and out.
Yes.
LSD probably helped a little bit as well, I have to confess. But I'm a big Hendrix fan, and I thought it was extraordinary. I loved it.
I would imagine. God, that was 1970, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Blimey, yes.
June,
God.
sometime, I think.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah, so I did that. But what happened? I came back. I know, yeah, I answered the ads in Melody Maker. Bass player wanted. No time wasters. As the ads would always say. And
Yes.
I got into a band with a couple of very kind of middle class kids who parents. I remember they came from not Slough, Stroud, up in the Cotswolds, and going and spending a weekend there once with the girlfriend I acquired at that point. And they were very fancy, very posh people, and such. But they were trying to be Genesis, really, that band. But it's fine.
Right.
Played them a bit, but it was a bit not going anywhere. And about a year later, I somehow or other ended up in another band called Highway, who were playing kind of country rock, really, which was all okay as well. But neither of which I was terribly passionate about. But I was playing, and also I got into a band in between all that, which I also answered an ad. And this is a guy who kind of fancied himself as he played the Hammond, and he had a silver-coloured Hammond. He was his name, the nice.
Oh, Keith Emerson.
Keith Emerson, yeah, and he had a band with me, him and a drummer. So very, very Keith Emerson at that point, or ELP. And he had a gig, Lord knows how or why, at a ski resort in Andorra called Thollomur, and 2 weeks, good money. So we got in our minivan and crossed the channel and drove all the way down to Andorra and spent 2 weeks up there. I hadn't learned to ski at that point, so it wasn't skiing, but I'd never been up in the mountains, so I'd hardly seen snow anyway in my life. So fascinated. I did get food poisoning from, and I still remember it was that sort of cassoulet made with kind of boiled up stew, but mainly with sausages and leftovers. And
Blimey.
but I was also, for that band, I was the lead singer.
Right.
And we were doing Taj Mahal amongst other songs, 6 Days Upon the Road and something else. Anyway, yeah, so that was a funny gig too. So I did that. But that band also, don't think we ever did anything else. And then how it all worked out with Gong, you must have heard this story somewhere or read it. But it's how I joined Gong. Was that I had a girlfriend later in the 70s, in 72, who moved into this house in Hendon still, by the way. There should be a plaque on that house.
Yes, there should be a blue plaque, really.
Definitely. So anyway, the people who came through that house was quite mad. But anyway, this girlfriend got a job working at the Manor Studios in Oxfordshire, the Virgin Manor.
Yes.
And as one of the girls who cleaned and made the beds and sometimes cooked meals and stuff. And I would go and visit her on the weekend. I, by that time, was supporting myself as a timber deliverer, delivering timber for a timber yard all around northwest London. So they were based in Cricklewoods. Yes, I got to know northwest London quite well. Anyway, the good bit was that I got to keep the van, so I could drive up to on the weekends. I'd drive up to a manor and just north of Oxford and just hang out. It was great. And I got to know at that point. Branson would come up on the weekends and his cousin Simon Draper and I remember Christmas Eve on 1972 and sitting in the TV room, and Richard comes in dressed as Father Christmas, and the full hat, and I don't think he didn't have the beard at that point, so fake beard, big long white beard, and he's carrying a bag of goodies, of presents, and he's carrying also a green pixie costume.
Right.
Right, I got this band in here they're French, and they do Christmas on Christmas Eve, and they're all having dinner, and I want to go in and give them my presents, but will you put this on and be my Santa's helper to to give these presents out. Oh, I go, all right. Yeah, so I put on the pixie costume, and off I go, me and Richard Branson, into the dining room, and handing out, all the presents, and then Richard was going, ha, 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 and I'd pass them out to all the people, and then we disappeared again. And I had no idea, but that was Gong, that band. They were doing a Flying Teapot album.
Right.
But about 3 months later, I'd split up with the girlfriend by this time. And suddenly I get this phone call out of the blue, and she's in France. And she said, "Now, you remember that band at Christmas?" And I go, "No." Well, and she was very deeply into astrology and alchemy. She was serious. She would go to the British Library and pull out medieval texts by Robert Flood and various alchemists, and she taught me how to do astrology, and she did it really in depth, to take you through every tiny little subtle aspect and of the planets and of the houses and the rest of it. Anyway, so she rings me from France, and she says, "So, well, anyway, I was that band, and they've got a Leo guitarist, which is Steve Hillage, and they've got a Scorpio drummer, which is Pierre Merlin, and they've got an Aquarius saxophone, Didier, and they've got an Aquarius synthesizer player, which is Tim Blake." And he said they need a bass player, and if they had a Taurus bass player, they'd have the 4 fixed signs of the zodiac, fire, earth, air, and water. And you're a Taurus, and you're a bass player, so you must come immediately.
Yes, wow, absolutely. No time wasters either.
I like it all. It's completely. Yes, that's a bit. Nobody does that. They musicians. They want to know what I play like. And she said, "No, you'd be perfect. You'd be perfect." And anyway, it turned out David Allen was taking a sabbatical, but he'd just so fed up. The band had exploded during the making of Flying Teapot, and he finally got it finished and mixed, and it was being released. But meanwhile, he and Julie, David had somehow managed to acquire a little stone cabin in Mallorca, not far from Robert Graves.
Right.
Graves' connection came also through Robert Wyatt's father, funnily enough. It's all academic world of Canterbury University. Anyway, he and Julie owned this cabin, very nice one, and so they were going to go and take a break there. And meanwhile, they'd left Steve and Didier and the others to kind of sort out the band and figure out what was going on. And but he happened to be coming through. David was going to come through London and get his flight to Spain from London. And so I said, "Look, they've got to hear me." And she said, "Okay, well, David said he's coming through London. He can come and hear you." And I said, "Okay, well, I do a jam night at the Pheasantry. Get him to come down and hear me play. At least you've got to hear me play. I can't just jump on a ferry to France." And anyway, so David comes to the gig at the Pheasantry, and a nice chat with him, and he's very jolly. And then during the set I played, it was just a jam night thing, and I just played funky jazzy stuff, and David danced around like an idiot, as he does in the audience. And then afterwards he goes, "No, mate, just go. You're perfect. Just go. You'll be lovely. Go there. Go now."
Right.
And so I did. I got on a ferry, and I got to Paris, and I got on a train and went down to Sens and got picked up at Voisines was the nearest town. Sens, I think. No, it's Sens. Yeah, the nearest town. It used to be the old capital of France. Anyway, and got picked up by their sound guy, Phoenix, Francis Linon, and drove off into 14 kilometers up into the forest, and there, in this crazy old hunting lodge, there's 25 odd stoned French and English hippies, and I joined Gong. That was it.
And that was it. No time wasters. Wow. So they got the album. Did they tour that particular album at all? Did you go on tour with them?
Absolutely, yeah. And before we did that, what we did was we managed to put together a set, and somebody, Gong were really quite well known in France, apart from Camembert Electrique had done pretty well there, and David was very well-known figure in the French, rock world, and very sympathetic press there. And so anyway, so we worked up, a good long 2-hour set, and a lot of jamming involved in it. But various songs, some from the Flying Teapot album, but some other Camembert stuff, and other stuff that were ideas that were being worked out. A lot of which ended up on Angel's Egg. And then
Right.
somebody organised this 10-gig tour for about 2 weeks, all around France, and off we went. And it's the best thing because they had a thing there where to kind of preserve the French culture and stop it being sort of swamped by those perfidious English and the Americans. They had funding, and they'd set up, and almost every small town had a hall or a centre called the Maison de Jeunesse de Culture, which is a young youth culture, and they had funding, and Gong had a management that actually figured it all out and booked these tours, which paid really good money. Not that I ever saw it, but it all went into the pot, and we all lived in a very communal way. But it paid for bands and food and everything, and we did some great gigs. It was really very enjoyable because they were all great musicians, and we were all kind of young and bold and happy to jam, and we had material and we could work it out, and it was a very good thing. And it's been, some of it came out through Gas as a thing called Paragong,
Yes.
to call it, because it wasn't that. And some people like Tim Blake thinks that we were supposed to be Gong, and David and Julie had left and were never coming back. And it was only because he saw how good we were that he came back. But it's simply not true. It was David, as far as I knew, was going away with Julie, and they were going to come back, and we were going to do the Gong thing, which is what happened.
Yes. That's
So he
quite
comes back, we work it all up, and then we went and did a tour of England, which because nobody had ever heard of Gong at that point in England, this tour consisted of about a dozen gigs in Virgin Records shops.
right.
From
Blimey.
Brighton to Aberdeen, I tell you, we played them all, and we did some great gigs. But we actually literally set up in the shop and played, and sometimes it was really hard going, but mostly they were really magical, mad gigs. The one in Sheffield was brilliant because it was the outside was a kind of building site and kind of rubble, and it was up on a hill and looked out over the Sheffield hills, and they'd set up outside there. So all these hippies turned up, and it was really magical. It's just one of those rare magical gigs that
Oh,
happen. And
that's
people
rather.
years later would come and tell us. We always sold out well. We would play just City Hall in Sheffield and sell out 2,000 every time. It's just very
The hippie homeland of Sheffield. So you did those gigs. Then did you go straight back into writing the next album, which is Angel's Egg?
Yeah. So we went back and prepared for it. And meanwhile, Virgin had put together the first 24-track mobile studio in Europe. And they got the first Ampex 24-track 2-inch and stuck it in the back of a container over the Helios desk, and they trundled off, and God knows how they managed to set it all up in front of this big old hunting chalet, and that's how we made Angel's Egg. It's just a great story in itself, Angel's Egg, because it really was. And that the house had a big kind of banquet hall, which we'd they'd done before I got there, sort of soundproofed it in as much as deadened the walls and covered with carpets, and there's all that. And the drums, bass, and the guitar, Hillage was in there. And then I think Didier was the first who said he wanted to play in the forest. And so they said, well, where do you mean? He said, oh, well, it's a very nice place, just down here. I would play, and the sun would be reflecting off the trees, and it would be a beautiful thing. And I mean, Didier has a bad accent, but he could do that and make it sound incredibly credible and believable. because he was an extraordinarily good musician,
Yes.
the great musicians of the age. And he said, "Oh, you want to do that?" So they said, "No problem." And they ran mic lines out into the forest where he wanted to do this, and stands, and they had a headphone feed right out into the forest. And so that was great. So, well, of course, as soon as Jilly heard about this, she thought, "Oh, yes, I want to sing in the forest because I'm the Earth Mother."
Well, quite, yes. You've got to...
Well, she did Space Whisper, Jilly. She didn't really sing. She made a sort of sound with her voice and her Vincent echo rep that she controlled with a button. She was very skilled at this, and it's called Space Whisper, what she does. And she does kind of poetry and spoken word with lots and lots of echo. And so, no problem. So they ran, electricity out for the echo machine and the microphone and the headphones, and there's Jilly set up in another part of the forest. Then Tim Blake goes, "Well, I want to be in the forest because, the synthesizer is such an organic." Anyway, yes, he got his two 15-inch bass cabinet JBL Lansing, no, Altec Lansing speakers with the horns. They were huge mid-horns. I mean, they're big, in fact, it's a little PA system. And he can set up in another part of the forest. And God bless them, the engineers of the Manor studios. They went and set him up out there, and they sent him a headphone feed, and they sent the stereo microphones up and the DI boxes, and they're all out. I mean, this is like 50, 60 yards into the forest here. And so Tim's out there, and those three are in the forest, and we're down in the music room. And David is up in his meditation loft in this sort of pointed apex of this house. So he could sit there cross-legged with his joss sticks going, and his pictures of Krishna and God knows what, and and play his guitar, the Sandoy guitar, and sing as well. And he said, "Yes, that's great. I'm up here, no problem." They sent the cables and the headphones and the microphones. And I mean, God bless it. That was amazing. And if you listen to that album, it's a very, very nice record. It's got a real vibe to it, and a lot of it's live. The backing tracks are live. We just played it all, and it was all no overdubs for all the basic groove parts at all. I mean, a lot of the solos maybe were dubbed, but and other stuff. But there's a lot live in that record, and it's a lovely sounding record. It's got a lovely atmosphere.
Yes. Did you? Because you did was that quite a big, grueling tour on the back of that album that you went around Europe and Britain?
There were many grueling tours. I'm trying to remember.
What was touring like for Gong at that stage?
Complicated in a way, but simple. We had a sort of a 10-seater sort of minibus. There was kind of box-shaped Ford, and they weren't aeroplane seats. They were literally sit up, bench seats, like not at all comfortable.
Right.
Which was kind of tiring. And there was a gig we did that year, and I think it was between coming back from the English tour and doing the album, or it could have been, I'm not sure either side. Johnny would know. Johnny Green would have that on the records. But there was an extraordinary gig because it was in Tunisia on a festival called Tabaka.
Yes. Well, have you?
Which was a jazz festival. You're going to be massacred. But it was a proper jazz festival. I think Miles Davis was the headline act, and a lot of American really classy jazz people, and Gong. And we were accommodated in one of these strange little kind of huts that were made out of circular, and the whole thing was like on sand, and it was next to the sea, next to the Mediterranean, and in the north of Tunisia, and so just a little village called Tabaka, but outside it was this area, and this whole area which had maybe dozens and dozens of these white circular huts with sort of Fijian Buri style grass ruse, So it's sort of very incongruous and totally not Arabian in any sense. Nevertheless, there they were. We all had one of those to live in for our accommodation. And the stage was a music show set on the stand. The audience sat on the stand, and the whole thing was surrounded by about a 5 foot high stone fence, sort of a plastered, I think vaguely red plaster or something. There's an audience of a couple of thousand. And that gig was also memorable because we started it, and as we did in those days, and quite often for a long time, we'd start with a slow improvisation with sort of floaty stuff and Didier and echoey guitar stuff, and Steve would splish and splash, and Tim would do some synthesizer jiggles and whittles and drums, and very slowly, I would start in the little groove, and the drums would join in, and then we'd sort of jam on this groove, and then somehow or other we'd end up going into a song, which would be sort of flow out of it. And so we start off that way, and we're floating away like this, and everyone's come in, and we're sort of about ready to go into it, and then we looked around, and David wasn't there.
Right.
He'd just gone. He had left the stage. And so I had a hurried conversation with Steve, and decided that we could do a Paragong set. That was okay. We would just do a Paragong set, and so we did. Except that about 45 minutes into the set, we're sort of coping and we're doing it, but it didn't help. I have to say that that I and Steve and David had taken some acid before this gig, and so the acid was sort of working its stuff, and so things were a little bit swirly. But the thing about acid is that if you're concentrating on something, you're fine, and you just concentrate on that, and you will be as concentrated as you can humanly be. It's a really interesting thing that it's only when you stop that suddenly the world sort of explodes again. But if you're focused on something, and playing a piece of music is a very focused act. Anyway, so focused there, playing away and managing to sort of hang on and make it all work. And suddenly he's there in the audience, in front of me, leaning on the front of the stage, is only about 4 feet high, staring up at me. David Allen.
Right.
And his full face painted with day-glow red and green like Indian chief. And he had a headband that had the Gong symbol with the eye and the triangle thing, and that he was wearing for the stage thing. And he's looking up at me. And I don't know what the fuck, And the rest of the set, he's staring up at me. And every note I played, he would sort of go like, with his eyebrows, lifting up there. Is that, I just thought the most, every note, I was hanging on to my life, just every moment was being kind of judged and analysed, and that's the most.
Wow, that's quite a lot of pressure. What did he say when you met him afterwards? Did you?
Well, eventually, I've talked about it over the years, and he said he just felt that he didn't need to be there, and so he just left. And then I think he thought of something he'd left in the shed, and he went back to his hut, is what it was, and then couldn't remember why he was there, and sort of wandered around a bit, and eventually saw the band playing and wandered back in and wandered up to the stage and said, "Oh, it's Mike and Steve and Didier."
Right. That's very casual. That's so casual for the 70s. So then you write the next album kind of on the road. This is the album,
so
which
it
is
evolved out of various ideas that happen like that, and it's like when my contribution was Sold to the Highest Buddha, where I wrote the riffs and the title. It was my title, Sold to the Highest Buddha, so I thought it was very witty, and it's got some very clever little riffs. There's it's a 6/8 to start with, and then it goes through a 5/4, and then it goes for a really nice 7/8 sort of rock and rolly boogie riff. It's just hard to do in 7/8, but I think it really works rather well. And anyway, that's on that album. I also contributed the riff on Inner Temple Bliss, but there's a lot of things that Tim Blake would never forgave David, because when he came to doing the credits for all the songs on it, he completely screwed it up. And he gave me a fair credit for Soul to the Highest Buddha, so that was 50-50, him and me. But things like the Inner Temple Bliss, which is one of my favorite riffs that I've ever written, it's just very simple, but I like those very simple but funky riffs that just repeat and everything shifts around. It was a great riff, and I think he either gave that to Didier or to Steve or to Tim. It just didn't give me the credit for it, but I didn't notice, and it wasn't like big bucks or anything at that time. I didn't think about that. Tim, on the other hand, never forgave him and felt that there were a couple of other errors that he thought, well, not errors, they were deliberate, master plan, and that David was definitely an evil man who had stashed all these secret millions in Swiss bank accounts. Yeah, he's a deeply troubled soul, I'm afraid, and I'm afraid David didn't have a lot of millions stashed away.
Right.
I mean, he might have kept that.
Yes.
He shouldn't have done, but he did very nice things. Right here and now, he formed a band with them that got called Planet Gong, I think, and he got an advance from Virgin for it, or Charlie, and he gave 20 grand to the band to buy a bus. They didn't have a van, gear van or anything. They just gave them that money for them, and they kept it. It was never a question of, I want my share or anything when they split up. So, David definitely was very loose with money, and he was one of those people who would sign the back of a napkin, and it would get turned into a contract by Jean-Luc Young or various other charlatans of the business. But I don't think he was the conniving man that Tim likes to think he is.
Right. Yes.
Anyway, there we are. So
yes,
Angel's Egg.
That was Angels. But then, what was the atmosphere like going into the next album, You, which is this fifth studio album, and is it the third in this trilogy that you're doing?
Yeah. So this was David's idea. There was a trilogy of Zero, the hero. With a standard kind of mythology. Like Homer's epics. That's what's his name, the hero of those. But goes off. The young innocent strides out into the world and has their adventures and overcomes challenges, and then it's a journey of self-discovery, really. And then you come back to where you started, and you're the same but new, and that's the whole. It's a classic, hero myth in that sense, but sort of muddled up with David's. A wonderful imaginative mythology that borrowed from all sorts. But yes, so this was that was part two, was the and there is a kind of story going through it all, but very loose. That yes, the third album. So what happened was that they decided for various reasons that we should move to England, which I was a bit disappointed about because I really like living in France. Anyway, so we moved to England, and we rent this house called Middlefield Farm, that David always liked to call Middle Class Farm, because it was a nice Cotswold stone sort of just outside Whitney, the beginning of the Cotswolds. So, but it's a nice old country farmhouse, but made out of stone, and had a barn and had a row of huts, and Tim had a whole above the barn, and one of the big sort of loft in the barn where he could set out all his gear and his stuff and hang drapes and live that way. I had a room, and Steve McKett had a suite somewhere. David and Julie had a suite somewhere in this, the attic loft conversion. It was a big house that could hold a lot of people, and we could make a noise, and it backed onto fields, so you go wandering off. I thought it was very nice. I really liked it.
Yes, it
But we
sounds like that.
decided that to write the next album, we needed to sort of get focused and really concentrate and not allow distractions. And so it was decided, and I was never party to those. I just said, "Yep, whatever." To go, and we hired this cottage called in a village called Little Bedouin. And again, Johnny will know what the cottage was called, but anyway, it was a nice cottage, and we could stay there and not be bothered by anything, no girlfriends and partners and anybody. We were on our own. And over a couple of weeks, we just sat and every day in the cottage with our gear and played and jammed and discussed ideas and took ideas and turned them into structures and built things and created what became the You album. And so it did. It came out of ideas and jams that then were given structures.
Yes.
Some of it worked really well, I think.
Yeah. So what was the atmosphere like with the band at that stage, actually? Was it it was your kind of almost the classic lineup, isn't it, of the band? Were things
At this
quite
point,
harmonious?
we had Did It Steve. I mean, yeah, I have to say, it's always been problematic. I don't know when exactly he first left the band, but I think it was after we'd made Angel's Egg. And I'm not sure whether we did a tour or something, but anyway, he decided that we were just not up to his standard of musicianship because, he's a very skilled musician. And he studied classical percussion in the Conservatoire in Strasbourg. He actually worked with Stockhausen on a couple of things.
Right.
He could start, he was could read. He was a classically trained musician. I mean, I do remember the first jam I had when I got there, the very first day I got to the house in France. And we went and had a jam with him and Steve and Didier. And he was what I call a top kit drummer. It's all very sort of fiddly, twiddly stuff, lots of cymbals and thrusts and claps and left hand, and I'm going, where's the kick?
Right.
Where's the kick drum? I'm not really hearing that kick drum, And I've been playing, as I said, Motown and soul and some rock stuff. And I knew that, the bass and the kick drum should lock in, and it gives enormous power, and it gives solidity, and it gives groove and stuff. So after we'd had this jamming session for a while, and I remember going upstairs to listen to some music in this listening room we had, and Pierre's playing me things like My Vishnu Orchestra, In a Mounting Flame, and it's all really brilliant, clever, sort of proggy, jazzy stuff that I've been listening to in London. It's all us musos were listening to and going, "Oh wow, that's amazing!" And playing settings 8 times there, and he's switching to 15. It was all wonderfully complicated and clever stuff. But to me, it was interesting. I liked the atmosphere, but it was just not the groove. I like groove, but also I just felt it was. Needed to be. Anyway, so after he sort of played a bunch of various jazzy things to me, and I thought, okay, I'll tell you what, I'm going to play him something that, and I'm going to. I did it deliberately. I said, listen, this is my favorite drummer. I think he's just the best drummer. You got to listen to this. I played the band. It's like they go off, and he took to boom, jack, boom, jack. Boom, made for free, and take a little right on me.
Right, yes.
Boom. And I just know, and he'd look at me like, you're like an idiot. What are you talking about? It's the stupidest, simplest thing. And I just said, no, listen to that. The guy is not he doesn't have to play anymore. The groove is all there. This is the groove, best groove you'll ever hear. It's just fantastic. And then I played some Stevie, Herbie Hancock, and thrust. I was really into at that point, and and so yes, this I can do the funky jazz stuff and feel good, but I just wanted to make that point, that it's not, it's not what it's about. You don't care how techno flash you are. You've got to be. It's got to groove. It's got to have feel, and that's always my point with him.
Yes.
He did. He got the point. We did. You listen to the stuff we did, and he learned to play his kick really solidly. It's a very the thing that I did have that effect on him.
Yes. And then how does the release of the album and the tour go? Because are there kind of shifts of people coming and going from the band at this stage?
I don't think at that point, no, when I think the first Angel's Egg tour was straight. I don't remember, I don't remember it being problematic. I know that all went quite smoothly, and but Pierre did leave some point, and so I know that because by '74 we were doing a huge tour of Europe that went from France to Germany, back to France, and then up through Benelux and Holland and Denmark, and then Scandinavia. It was massive, and it was when we were going the first leg. We'd done 2 weeks in France, and then we had to cross over and do a couple of weeks in Germany, and going through the border from France into Germany. There was actually customs in those days. I don't know how to think of it, but that's there was a customs, and for some reason it was one of those fortunate things that I happened to be driving the bus at that point, the band bus. It was still that 10-seater, and the gear was traveling in a van separately. Anyway, so I knew we were coming up to the border, and I remember thinking, the only bit of dope I've got on me is this teeny little bit of hash, and it's in my pocket, and it's probably not a good idea to have it there. So I took it out of my pocket, and I tucked it up my sleeve, and I had a rubber band and this little bag of plastic that's in, and wrapped it around my arm here. Just don't know why. I just felt nervous coming to the border, And I had been in a bust in Australia, which I managed to escape without getting arrested. So, I was aware of the possibility of, of these things happening. And so anyway, because I was driving, we arrived at the customs, the border, and I'm the driver, so I did talk. I speak French and a bit of German, so I'm doing the talking anyway. And they want us to all get out, and they hear that we're musicians. And it's on the French side too. They want us to get out, and they're going to search us. And they take us into this room, and then they take me off into a back room, and they ask me to drop my trousers down. And then they, have a look, and actually look in my undies, and then they tap me around here and on the outside of my arm and my back. And then they take me back out into that room where I walk past, the rest of the band, another 10 of us. And as we walk by, I said, "It looks like a trousers job," just like that. That, a Frenchman wouldn't understand, I'm thinking.
Yes.
But and all of the rest of the band understood, except the drummer, which is Laurie Allen, who didn't get the message. And he goes in, and sure enough, it's in his undies.
Oh, God, right.
And he got busted. And poor old Laurie, Laurie's a really sweet guy and a lovely jazz drummer. He's a bit light for me. Again, he's not a kick drummer, but, Pierre had left by that time, deciding we weren't good enough. And Didier loved him because Didier loves top kit drummers. He's a jazzer, really, Didier. And so that was good. But, he got busted. And what meant was that he would not be allowed back. He got fined, but he wasn't going to be allowed back into France. And
right.
we had another 2 weeks in France after the weeks or two in Germany, and then we had to do a whole more once stuff in Belgium and Holland and Denmark and the rest of it, and so we had a crisis, and that's why when they get the word back to London. And Branson, being Branson, he's a problem solver. He says, "Oh, Bill Bruford's just left. Yes, I'll see if he'd like to come and do it." And sure enough,
Bill Bruford, my God.
Out. We do our German leg and we come back, and poor old Laurie goes back to England. He wasn't let back into France for at least 10 years, maybe more. It's really quite shocking because there's a tiny bit of dope, it was just nothing.
Yes,
really
that is horrendous.
He used to play in France a lot. He's a jazzer. He did that.
Yeah.
Anyway, so Bill Bruford arrives, and we'd taken this rehearsal place that was in the grounds of this old monastery where Berengaria, the wife of Richard the Lionheart, I think, had stayed while he was off on one of his crusades, is what the story goes. Anyway, that's just coincidental, but I remember it for that reason. And Didier wrote a piece of music called Berengaria, just noodling in one of those sort of cathedral ruins that had a lovely acoustic that he liked to play in.
Yes.
Anyway, but Brill was amazing because we had, I think, 5 days to learn this insanely complicated set, with all these time changes and strange shots, jumps and changes and shifts and arrangement, leaps and bounds. Very 2 hours long, and a lot of it arranged in a lot of jammy sections, but then also cues to get in and out of the jams and the rest of it. And he did what I thought were the most brilliant things, because we learn the song and he work it all out and we get it right. And he said, okay. And he had a little 1974, we're talking, right? So he had this little metronome. There's just a box about that big, and it had a knob that was continuous, sweeping from 50 BPM to 200 or something like that. Anyway, he would sweep around till he got the right tempo. And all it did was it did a click, but you couldn't hear that. It also had a red LED light that would just go bleep, 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 bleep at the tempo that you set it for. And then he'd write down the tempo. And he did this for every song, every piece. And so when we came to do our first gig, he had the set list, and we had an actual drum roadie at that time, a guy called Tam, a Scottish, and he's very good, and he knew drums. And he had them all geared and trained. So Tam would sit at the side of the stage with a set list. And while one track was playing, he would be setting up the tempo of the next song. And as soon as that song finished, Bill would look over, there's the flashing light going beep, beep, beep. So he knew to go, okay, it could be 6, 8, or it could be 7, it doesn't matter. He can go 1, 2, 3, 4, bam, 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 and off we go. And when you think about it, tempo is so important for a musician or for a band. The drummer gets the tempo right. Your half of your job is done. The rest of the arrangement will come back to you. But when you're looking at 2 hours of complicated music and you've got, really 5 days to do it, it's impossible, really. And the charts are not going to be detailed enough. And so the key thing that need to know is the time signature and the tempo. And when you know that, then you're off you go. If it's a 6/8, so I know it's but it's not or it's not, it's that tempo and it's that feel. And that was so clever because he did the whole set and he was just perfect, and he was solid as a rock. He was so good, Bill, a very fine drummer. I see him every 5 years or so, Bill, and he's still a really nicest guy. He's really, really a real gentleman. And I just always like to tell that story because I think it was so professional and brilliant of him to think of that and to do it.
Well, absolutely. So what's then after that release? Are you on the next album, which is the 6th studio album, but without David?
Yeah, Shamal's the first one without David. I'm also on Hillage. After we finished You, we actually just stayed on at the Manor and made Fish Rising, which is Steve's first solo album. And it's really the same, pretty much the Paragong lineup, except it's also got sorry, senior moment here.
Yes.
Lovely Hammond organ player who was in Hatfield in the North, and he
Oh,
was Khan, actually. I think it's in Steve's first jazzy band before Gong. It'll come back to me in a second.
right. So that was. So with that particular release, so that was another side project you were doing at the time.
Well, the Fish Rising one was, so Steve in the back of his head had always been thinking, well, this Gong lark's all right, and then I'm going to have my career as a, guitar rock hero. And I have to say he was encouraged in this by Simon Draper, who was, ran the music label. He was Branson's cousin. And Simon
Yes.
was a very musical guy. He's the guy who liked prog rock a lot. And he's the guy who signed bands like Gong, like Hatfield and the North and Henry Cow. Branson didn't know a clue about music in general. I mean, what he is a marketing genius, but he had no idea really about why. And then I remember asking Simon, I said, "What made you think Tubular Bells would sell?" And he said, "Well, I didn't think it would go sell anything like what it did in the end sell. But what I did know was that, he said I was managing the Virgin Music store in Notting Hill Gate, and we used to have all these stoned hippies come in, and we had the bean bags, and you could put headphones on, and they were listening to long form, instrumental proggy music, just like that. And he knew that Mike Oldfield had played with Soft Machine, and he'd worked with Kevin Ayers, and he'd been around that scene. And he said when he thought he would do something like that would be long form prog, and so he let him. They built the studio, and they were running it as a commercial studio, but he was allowed to stay in one of the back rooms, staff rooms. Really, they had a long line of rooms for all the servants in that house. It was a big old
Yes.
manor house, and he had a bedroom there. And I remember, going up when I was hanging out with that girlfriend, and we would sit around in somebody's room and smoking a joint, and somebody would say, "Hey, Mike," and not meaning me, go and get us, play us your tape. And he'd go off and get his tape recorder, and he'd set it up and play it. And it would be basically it was Tudor bells with just a guitar, just like dang, dang, ding,
Yes.
all the riffs, and just a guitar though, just playing it. And I thought, that's interesting because he's taken these kind of riffs that any guitarist does when you sit at home and noodle in your bedroom, and you might come up with a nice little riff, and you'll play it for 20 minutes. Think, oh, that's a really nice, catchy little riff there. Yeah, I'll remember that. It's really good. And you don't write it down, and you don't remember it, and you forget it. But he did. He got it all there. You think he had a cassette or something. He recorded them all. He kept them all somehow or other, and he strung them together. And if you analyze what Tubular Bells is, it is that. It's just those riffs. And then he orchestrates them by going in and downtime and sneaking in at night. And, he was allowed to. It was just, be when the band had finished, or there's a gap between bookings, and he and Simon Draper and Tom Newman, they go in and working on this project for a year before. And that's how it came about. So
Blimey.
anyway, he said, look, I knew it was, I thought it might sell 100,000, if we're lucky. That would have been great. And then it sold 500,000. I said, well, that's amazing. But then that's where Branson kicks in, and he goes across to America, and he meets up with all these film production people, and eventually hears about The Exorcist, and they're trying to find a piece, and he says, what do you think? Take this, and he gives it to them, and they go, yeah, we like it. And suddenly it jumps to 5 million. And then, on it goes until it hit 25 million and so forth. But that really funded Virgin for probably the first 5 years, and it would have gone bust with Gong and Hatfield. I mean, we were all selling like 30,000 or 40,000.
Right, yes. It was a bit of a yes, that was quite something actually. So then as the kind of as we get towards that sort of mid to late 70s, what's your sort of next musical direction and sort of leaving the band? How does that come about?
Well, this is what happens was that so after the David leaves the band in I think January of '75. I mean, we'd already kicked Tim out by this point because Tim had gone really doolally and ended up with a screaming row over a dinner table with Tim standing on the table with a carving knife, screaming at David and throwing the knife very clumsily. But whatever, he left the band, and then David did the same as he'd done in Tobacco. Started a gig in Cheltenham, I think it was, Colston Hall or something, somewhere like that. Not Bristol, it was in Cheltenham, and David comes on, no, he doesn't. We all come on and we're starting the setup and doing the warm up, jammy thing and noodling thing. And then we look around and David was nowhere to be seen. And then the road says, oh, David's just gone out the back door.
Right.
Found some miles later, about hours and hours later, wandering down the highway. And he said his story was that he tried to come on, but there was this force field that wouldn't let him get on stage, and he just couldn't do it. And so he thought, oh, well, I guess I'm not supposed to play. And he turned around and off he went. And he never came back at that time. And we did reform, of course, in '93. We did that reunion in North London, in
Yes.
whatever it's called. But yeah, that was good. But he then also formed various other kind of Paragong and various other things. But no, that was it. He left Gong that way, and he'd always said he'd always imagined Gong would be like this vehicle that a bit like Sun Ra, the orchestra.
Yeah.
That he always said, look, it's just like a vehicle where musicians come and they give their music and they leave, but the orchestra is just this vessel, this vehicle to do this. And he liked that idea, and he always thought Gong could be like that, like a vehicle, and he didn't want to be necessary. He thought Steve could be captain of the ship after him, if he had the right personality, and he really did want Steve to do that. Steve, meanwhile, was sort of planning his glorious solo career, which and Simon Draper was very keen about and then pushing him for. Anyway, so we started making Jamal at that point, and then Steve said he's leaving and thought it was best to do it before we did the rest of the album. But he did come and play some lovely guitar on a couple of the tracks, and a beautiful guitar solo on the first track, which is A Wingful of Eyes. The guitar solo in the middle of that's fabulous.
Yes, absolutely. Written by you. So when that album comes out, were you still part of that lineup, or were you sort of feeling?
By that time, okay, so we've lost Blake, but we've acquired a proper keyboard player called Francis Lemoine, who was Patrice Lemoine. He's a French jazzy kind of player that I think Pierre knew, and so Pierre's back in the band again. You have to see Pierre's come and gone several times here, but he's back for you, of course. And then David leaves; he stayed on, and Patrice played. He's a nice, very musical player, a very jazzy kind of player. And so there's him, and then somehow or other we ended up with a violin player. I think Didier brought Jorge Pinchevsky in, who was an Argentinian, was a wild violinist who was very, very good, but kind of mad and didn't really stick to the script a lot, but that was okay because Pierre and I and Didier could hold it down, and Patrice. So we had this core, and I think Pierre's girlfriend Mireille Bauer, she could play marimbas and
Yes.
very well, very skillful. So we've turned to we are heading towards a proggy jazzy band by now. As you might imagine from this lineup, Pillage is left. We don't have a rock guitar at all. We don't have any guitar. We have a crazy Argentinian violinist, and the only thing that's saving it from being a pure prog band was me saying we've got to have lyrics, we've got to have vocals, because otherwise we're just a boring proggy band, right?
Yes.
I'm pushing the idea that there's got to be, a thing, and since nobody else wanted to, I became the singer, and so I made that. This is the first album I'd ever sung on, and I think the last, to be honest, not sure as you count the Strontium 90, but I share the vocals with Sting, so not quite. And I think he won that one. But yes, it was. So it was me pushing really hard, and I managed to make that album have songs, not a lot, but and you can see half of it's instrumental anyway. And Didier was very much on the jazzy instrumental side, and Simon Draper, they all did. And there came a point where they just said, we don't want vocal, and we had this we were rehearsing for the tour that was going to promote this album, and we had a sort of falling out about where we were going with it and whether we wanted to have any vocals at all, and so it sort of split with me and Patrice wanting to keep vocals, and Pierre and Mireille and Jorge going for the instrumental side, and so then it came down to Didier, which way would Didier go, and Didier basically said, well, I don't mind really.
Right.
It could be this way, it could be that way, and it could go anywhere. Anyway, we left it up to, it was Simon Draper who chose. He said, no, that he thinks that it'd be better if they went for a pure instrumental jazzy thing, because that's what he preferred. And so I left the band, and I decided I wanted to be raining here.
Yes.
I thought, you should be a record producer, right? Because you don't have to stick in bands with smelly musicians doing endless tours and putting up incredibly annoying personalities. And even when you do, at least you know you're going to move on to another band, and you can do that. And so I had this in my mind that I would do it. And by this time, I was well positioned because I had a girlfriend who was Carol Wilson, who was the manager of Virgin Music's publishing company. And I'm living with her now, not far from here in Acton. And so she's she's happy to pay pay the rent. And in fact, she bought a flat, her first flat. And so I lived with her, and I was able to turn this loft conversion into a studio. And I managed to, sort of twist Richard's arm to give me £600. I said, look, I've put a lot of my life into this band, and I think I should get some compensation. And so he eventually said all right, and gave me 600 quid, which was enough to buy a 4-track tape machine, 1/4-inch, but 4-track, and a little 6-channel mixer, and a microphone for a Shure 57, and I actually managed to buy a drum kit for 50 quid.
Right.
I thought that'd be good, and I had that up in the attic, and you can hear on the Strontium 90 the album Police Academy. I don't know if you.
Yes. So this is with you, Sting, Stuart, and Andy
Summers. Yes.
So did you, because they had been the backing band for a very brief time with a woman called Ava Cherry, or no, Cherry Vanilla.
Cherry Vanilla, I think.
Yes.
Cherry
So
Vanilla.
was this after their moment with Cherry Vanilla?
Yeah, I mean, this is, look, what I know, okay, was that so my story. I mean, Stuart is very funny about it. He likes to say, "You tried to steal Sting from me," and I go, "Really?" I don't quite think how it's meant, but that's his version. So look, I'm now living with Carol. She's managing Virgin Music Publishing. She gets sent a demo of this band from Newcastle called Last Exit, and she likes the sound of it. She wants to see them. So we go up. I go up with Carol to Newcastle, and we see them play in a room above a pub, and they were good. In fact, they were like I said. I think it sounded like Weather Report with Stevie Wonder on vocals, is what I said,
Right.
and it was proggy, but in that nice kind of funky prog that was like that. It had a lot of this, pretty much that, and Sting's playing bass and singing, but he's singing kind of a Stevie Wondery style. He wasn't singing Bob Marley yet, and he was.
Yes.
That's another story which I should tell you, but anyway, so Carol loved him, and she thought, and I thought, well, all right, it sounds like Weather Report with Stevie Wonder. Which is why I never became an A&R man, I suppose. No, the songs were what was on Dream of the Blue Turtle. It was pretty much the material they were playing, if you listen to that. But so she liked them. She said, "Look, you've got to move to London because I'm never going to get record companies up to Newcastle." In those days, they were very arrogant, and they went, they didn't go past Watford, I think, unless it was Liverpool. But
Right.
Newcastle was like the end of the world, and unless you liked Lindisfarne. So anyway, Steve said, really, if you come to London, I can get lots of people to come and see you, and we'll get a record deal. But the band wouldn't move down, but Sting would, even though he was married to Frances Tumulty with a jobbing actress at that time, and they had a baby, Joe, and so she actually put up the money for the deposit on the flat, and I helped him carry a carpet that he bought from a carpet shop around the corner, a bit of offcut, really a basement flat just off Westbourne Grove, and persuaded him to move down to London. And he had met Stuart when Curved Air. In fact, I see you did a chat with Curved Air, didn't you?
Yes.
With Sonia, did you, or was it?
Yeah, definitely Sonia.
I've asked her to confirm that because I think they were still together at this time. Because they did Curved Air did a gig
Of course, yes.
I think Newcastle City Hall or Town Hall, and Sting's band, Last Exit, was a support band, and that's where Stuart saw him, and he said, "Oh, if you ever come to London, give me a call. Here's my number." And he liked him and saw that something there, and so Sting moves to London, ostensibly to get a deal for Last Exit, but he meanwhile is getting in touch with Stuart. And Stuart's got a flat down in Mayfair, actually. And so Stuart's sort of working on this idea of a punk band. And meanwhile, his brother, Miles, is trying to promote, it's got this idea to bring over this 15-year-old punkette from Akron, Ohio. I don't know where they all came from in the day. And he needed a backing band. And he said, well, can you put together a backing band for Cherry Vanilla?
Yes.
And so Stuart thinks, yep, okay. And that'll be my band as well. So he puts this band together, which is him and Sting and Henry Padovani, who was a Corsican true actual punk. He really was, and not very good, which qualified him as a punk guitarist. So he is, Henry, a very nice guy, but he is punky, really.
Yes.
Cool. I saw the very first gig. So they were the backing band, and also they were the support band. And their very first gig was in the Roxy Club in London, and I went down and saw it. And I thought, that's funny. It's like the Sting and Stuart are playing super fast, because we're punks and we play super fast, super tight, with punk bands. Well, not super tight. They go as fast as they could. They were like sloppy as fuck. Whereas Henry was sloppy as fuck as well. And so that they were too tight. They were too slick. Anyway, and then they were Cherry's backing band, and they were Fine Cherry Vanilla, and that's honestly how they started. But meanwhile, so Stuart, he'd had a couple of singles. Do you remember? The first couple that were kind of Call Out or something, the first two Police singles that were with Henry Padovani. Anyway, they were trying to be punky. But never mind that, because what I think is one of those incredible moments, really. So I was around visiting Sting in the basement flat in Westbourne Grove and just having a chat. I forget why. I might have been taking in something. But anyway, I was sitting down in the pad, and Stuart arrives, and I swear he's carrying a pile of Bob Marley records that big, and he says to Sting, "I'm going to turn you on to this guy." Guarantee you, verbatim. He says, "I'm going to turn you on to Bob Marley," and Sting's going, "What?" He says, "I just think I think it'll work." He really did. I mean, Stuart had the vision. He had a vision of the Regatta de Blanc. It all makes sense when you know that fact. But he really did. It wasn't Sting. It was Stuart thinking, well, this isn't working. I think they'd done the movie already by this time as well. They were like extras in Quadrophenia or something.
Right,
like that.
Of course,
and,
yes.
But they bleached their hair blonde as well, which was sort of helped the punky look. But if you remember their first couple of albums, they were blonde. But absolutely, he turned Sting onto it, and you can just hear it all there. I mean, that's real Marley. It's just like that, and Sting had none of that. Then you Dream of the Blue Turtles will hear none of that from that stuff. So
Right. God, that's interesting, isn't it?
The visionary, he really did see that thing. Then meanwhile, I'd put together. I'd done this demo in my attic in Acton with my 4-track. I mean, all distorted and very rubbishy, but I did half a dozen songs, and I gave them to Simon Draper, and he said, I think being kind really, he said, so it's a bit rough. I mean, I'll pay for you guys to go into an 8-track studio in Swiss Cottage, and you can do a better quality, recording, because at the moment it's pretty distorted and rough. I mean, I really was learning the ropes at that point, and had no idea what I was doing. But so we did. We went and recorded these songs, and I had a drummer. I had Henry Cow's drummer, Chris Cutler, lined up to do it, because he was the only drummer I knew that I was friendly enough with, and so I had him lined up to do the drums, and Andy Summers, and this is where Andy came into the picture. But I bumped into him in January of '77 at a party in Maida Vale with Lady June. Have you ever heard of Lady June? But she was like this poetess, sort of mother figure for all of the sort of Canterbury style Gong and Hawkwind as well, actually. And
what was her name again?
Kevin Ayres. They all used to.
What was her name?
What's that?
What was the woman's
Lady
name?
June, if you. Because I know what her real surname was. She wasn't a lady either. She's a Cockney.
Right.
You won't know Lady, but Pete Brown, he wrote the lyrics for King Crimson. I mean, he was one of her friends, and we used to hang out. It was just a place everyone would hang out there. She had a 4-bedroom.
Yes.
And it's the flat that Robert Wyatt fell from when he broke his back.
Right.
I was there that night too. But anyway, I'm at a party, and she had amazing parties, and the Stones, all sorts of people would be at one of Lady June's parties. And anyway, and I bumped into Andy, and Andy he'd toured playing for Kevin Coyne's band, who were doing it with Gong. We were switching, alternating headline, in the '74, and he'd come up to our house in Whitney in Middlefield Farm to jam, and I remember hanging out, having a jam. So anyway, I bumped into him at this party, and I said, "So Andy, what are you doing?" And he said, "Oh, I don't know, man. I've just spent 2 years in California studying classical guitar, And I've come back here, and it's all Sex Pistols and the Jam, and they're down, and they're ripping. Kids are ripping up the theatre. I'm going, I've got a fucking clue what's going on.
Right.
He's always a moaner.
Yes.
But he was right. He'd come back to, and this, imagine, in January 77, it was just like the place was, going to the dogs. And in terms of that music, and so I said, look, I'm doing this. I'm doing a demo for Virgin. Do you want to come and play guitar in it? He said, "Oh, all right, yeah, I'd love to, because I'm trying to get back here." So he comes round to my flat, and we learn the songs. And Sting's come round, and he's learnt the songs. And then the drummer I had lined up, it's Chris Cutler. He rings up about 3 days before and says, "So sorry, but we've just been offered this gig in Czechoslovakia." This is like 1977, before the wall come down and all that, and they were real hardcore, communists who were waiting to bring the revolution here. And off they were going, going to the heaven that is Czechoslovakia at that time, and so I told Sting, and I said, "Shit, I've lost my drum." He said, "Oh, look, I'll ask Stuart if he'll come along." So he rings up, and Stuart says, "Yeah, okay." So Stuart turns up at the studio called Virtual Earth in Swiss Cottage, and Andy turns up, and that's where Andy meets Stuart and Sting for the first time ever. They meet in this studio doing this demo of mostly my songs, but we also throw in a Sting song and a Stuart song. So that's what happens there. And so we make this recording. And meanwhile, a month or so later, I get a call from France, and this guy wants to put on a Gong reunion gig in Paris. And he said he's got the funding, he's going to do it, and he's got the Hippodrome. There's a circus tent in Paris. It's a permanent circus, to hold 6,000 people. And he said, I want to have it like all day from midday to midnight, and I want all of the members to be bringing their own band, and then at the end you all get together and you do a Gong set. It's just because everybody loves Gong, and he did. He sold out. The whole thing was a great success, and he's offered quite a few bob for it at the time. And so I said, "Okay, you guys up for this?" And they all go, "Yep." I think they were going to get a couple £100 each, which in 1977 was good money.
Yes.
And all expenses. So off we went to France. We were the second band on, and I do remember their faces, because we started with a very rocky song that I'd written called "Lady of Delight," and it's kind of a big rock riff. It's just sort of very not hippy dippy drifty, it's very sort of kind of punky in its energy, but a bit more musical than most punk songs, but still, a solid song. I remember that people in the audience go, sort of sitting back in horror.
Right.
Went down well. It was recorded on a 16-track, the whole thing, and the whole day was that. All the bands got out. I got a 2-inch tape that I had for years, and in the end, there was a Gong album got made out of it that got released in France, and eventually got released by Charlie Records all over the place. And that tape stayed with me for forever and ever. And I kept getting calls every now and then from various people who'd hear about it, who were, but Rob Ayling was one of them, if you ever hear of Rob Ayling, who had Voice Print, who was doing his bit to be another thieving record company.
Right.
Asshole. But he would ring me up and say, "I could really make some money from that. I could sell that." And another friend of mine who did have a label, and he said, "I really could make, sell 20,000 of those. I'll put it out properly." And I eventually I bumped into Sting at a music awards thing. I think it might have been the Ivor Novello Awards. I don't know how, because I'm still with Carol at this point, and but she's head of the music publishing. So we were gone to those kind of events, that. And I bumped into him. He was just there, and said hello. And when we were talking, and And he said, I still listen to those tapes. I think they're really good. You should do something with that stuff, And then I said, well, maybe I've been told, a couple of people have suggested it, but I don't know. So if I do something, who should I get in touch with? And he said, well, and I said, I don't want to go through Miles, because I knew Miles would be difficult.
Right.
He just I knew that because he'd already had screaming rows with Carol over Stings Publishing, because she couldn't stand the idea that he didn't get Stings Publishing, whereas Carol did for Virgin. And that's just another whole story. But so he said, "Here, will contact me at this number, because it goes direct to my personal manager and it won't go through Miles." So, I sort of thought, okay, well, I got them all. I got some time in a good studio, and I mixed the stuff I had and put it all together. And also, when I had that studio, Sting had come round one day. He phoned me up and said, "Look, I've just written this song and I really want to put it down on better than cassette. Can I come and knock it down in your studio?" So he comes around and he puts down acoustic guitar and vocal and bass guitar, and then he adds a little bit of African drum that I happen to have lying around that I actually got myself in Africa. And it was Every Little Thing That She Does Is Magic.
Right.
Lovely, lovely version of it. It's sort of an unplugged version before there was a plugged version, and it's not calypso at all. It's just very, very nice, very easy, very light groove. But he sings it beautifully, and it's just very simple and very easy and very clear. And so I said, "Look, I'll put a package together, but I've included that song, although I know it wasn't strictly, the Strontium 90s stuff. But if you don't mind, I'd like to put it in the package." And so I sent it off to him, and then I get how did it go? Yeah, I got a letter back from him saying, "Oh no, yeah, I didn't. I got a phone call from Miles out of nowhere, right? Miles rings me up and says, 'Val, Sting has no interest in this project whatsoever. And anyway, I manage this publishing, and so we have, there's no permission. You can't do this, and it's not going to happen. So fuck off.'" I know he wasn't quite as polite as that, I mean, that was literally, he really was like that. It was just, no, fuck off, no. And I said, that's funny. Anyway, so I wrote a letter to Sting. And at that point, I knew Carol was going to be seeing him. Actually, no, I knew that Carol had left. We split up by there, but nicely, and we're still friends.
Yes.
This is much later, some years later, in the mid-90s now. And the girl who took over Virgin Music Publishing was Maria Forte, and she said she was going to Paris and she was going to be singing Sting to discuss something about, because Virgin still had his publishing. There's a whole court case that he lost and was proven to have lied in court, by the way. But in the end, they got they renewed the deal, and they still had it. So she said, "I'm seeing him, so I could take your letter to him," because she knew I'd written this letter to Sting, and I'd said, "Listen, on this occasion, there are 3 occasions I've seen him where he'd said, I'm still listening to that stuff. Why don't you do something with it?" Then I'd seen him in 1984 or 5. I was working in LA producing Berlin, and they were supporting police at Hollywood Park, and I'm backstage in the sort of whole backstage area, and I see Sting, and I'm with some of the Berlin band, and I introduced them and said hello, and Sting's lovely, and he said, I still listen to that tape, you should do something with it, it's really good. And I saw it somewhere else, and he said that, and so when I see him that time, and I'd seen him at the Novello Awards, and that's when I thought, okay, I should do something, so I did, and anyway, so she said, so I wrote all this down. I said, "Look, I'm actually on this occasion. You said you were very happy with it. You were very proud of it, and then you told me here that you were, happy for me to do something with it. And you told me here, and and now I don't understand why Miles told me that you have no interest in this project, and what's going on." Well, I got a letter back from him, a handwritten letter saying, I'm really sorry, but at the time, that I got your tape, I was, about to release a solo album, and I was under a lot of pressure, and it really, was really a bad time for it to come out. And so, if you don't mind, I changed my mind, and I'd rather you didn't release it. And that was it, And he just bottled on it and two-faced as far as I'm concerned. I thought, what the fuck? Well,
Right.
eventually. It's a long story. There's not one you wanted to talk about. But yeah, I didn't tell this on the other tape. So you've got this as...
Right, yeah, it is.
So eventually, look, I had a lunch with Andy sometime later, still in the 90s. And I said, I can't get any result out of this, that, I want to release that. I can make a bit of money, I can use it. And I said, he said, well, I'm happy for you to put it out. I've got no objection. I said, well, can you tell Stuart? And so he said, yeah, he gave me a fax number for Stuart. So I sent Stuart a message. He said, yeah, absolutely, no problem. He said, I'd like to have some control over the artwork of it. But, as far as I'm concerned, I'm very happy for that to come out, no problem whatsoever. So then I send another package off directly to Miles this time. And then I get a phone call from Miles saying, well, I don't know why you're still doing this. I told you, nobody's Sting's not, not interested. I said the thing is, look, I've got, I never look. I said, Andy is happy to do it, and Stuart's happy to do it. He said, Stuart's not. I said, no, I've got a letter here from Stuart saying he's perfectly happy for me to put it out as long as he has control of the artwork. And he goes, well, let me think about it. And honestly, the way he talks. And
yes.
So 6 weeks later, he rings me up again and he says, okay, we can do it, but it's going to be on Sting's label. I go, what? Oh, okay, yeah, fine. It's going to come out, fine. That's good. And so in the end, it comes out on Sting's label. Sells about 11,000 copies, which I know because I managed to sell the publishing to Rondor, and I got I got a bunch of money from that. But it should have sold a lot more. It should have. Anybody that I know who was in that business said they could easily sell 50,000. That is just nonsense. It just means that it was available very quiet. I even had to. They were sending me figures saying it sold 3,000, but I had a colleague who could give me the American, there's when you scan a barcode when you sell a CD in America.
Yes.
In the 90s, I forget what it's called, but he said he got somebody who could access through it. And he said, yeah, no, like sold 11,000 in the first year. So I don't know what they're lying to you, so that's Miles. I don't think Sting would do that, but he didn't give a fuck, So anyway, that's the story about all that.
Yes.
The poor bastard. How are they going to survive? And then we got a 20 grand advance, and they insisted that it had to be split 4 ways, of course, because Sting and Stuart and Andy, I don't know how they survive on the few hundred million they scratch a living on. But there you go. It's rock and roll.
It is very strange and very rock and roll. So then this sort of goes into your world of production, and you become this producer that hits sort of the golden period of sort of hit singles, don't you, with such bands as Martha, Flock of Seagulls, and
yeah, I know it all went very well, and that's paid for my comfortable retirement.
Yes, well, Martha and the Muffins, which I did an interview with 2 of the members, Martha and Mark, who I guess are a couple. So were they the 2 that because you talk about Martha, were you talking about
2 Marthas?
Yes, there's 2 Marthas. I couldn't believe about
Martha and Mark is Martha Johnson.
Yes, and she's got, I think, something not that great physically. But do you know anything about Martha? Is it Yes.
So
So what
Martin Landon
happened?
is the one who's remained a very close friend, who is also not very well. She's got something that's called, I'm not sure. I don't think I should say this.
No, but that's fair enough. Yeah. So
Neuropathic thing that's quite rare, but she's yes, it's only happened in the last year or so. But she's not that's not very bright for her. But she's got a lovely husband who's an American Canadian artist who used to be her art teacher many years ago. But she lives here. She's currently back in Canada, but she lives out in the West Country and very close to one of her daughters, who's got 3 children and very nice, lovely husband. And the other daughter's just got married and is between Shepherd's Bush and the West Country. So they're all worked out nicely. And
so where are you based at the moment then?
I'm in Acton, West London.
And did you say Martha's in that area as well?
One of her daughters lives in Shepherd's Bush, so not far from here.
Right.
Our daughter is one of her best friends, and so they see her quite a lot. And we see her quite a bit, actually. We see Rebecca, and he's married quite a landed gentry man who's got a lot of land in Hampshire.
Right.
It's another world.
Another world.
Both Marthas, I mean, I'm afraid they're blighted, but they've had good lives overall.
Yes. Well, it's a bit sad about the other Martha. I didn't know that I'd just seen this photograph and was like...
Amazing. After Martha and the Muffins, she ended up working for Peter Gabriel as well, which is one of the reasons I used to go down there and how I hooked up with Phil Clark finally. So we've gone full circle here. But so she would see Phil quite a lot because Martha worked for the whole world and the WOMAD world. She became the sort of design manager of his. He was one of the first people to do their DVDs, interactive DVDs. So
right,
like video games that had music involved in them, so you could catch a little thing and you would have part of a song, and another one you'd catch this insect and you put it all together and would play one of his songs. And she was very involved in the graphic design of that and managing that whole end. It was all based down in the whole WOMAD and what should I call it? What's the studio called?
Real World.
Real World. So the Real World, that label they had down there, they had a whole, they had a couple of big kind of hangar warehouses that kept all the WOMAD staging stuff as well, and PA systems, and and they had a large area and they had offices there. That's where Martha would run this whole graphic design division.
Right, nice. So you worked on Echo Beach, didn't you?
Yes.
But did that take a lot of work to get that into shape? Well,
there's a funny story too, because yes, I went over to record that song. The demo had come to Carol in London, and she liked the song, and she signed the band, and then sent me over to record it. And at that point, I've been doing a couple of things that are minor successes. One in Belgium called a band called Fisher Z.
Yes.
Who were a couple of good songs, and it ended up selling quite a lot in Germany and Benelux and that, but never in the UK. But because of that, whatever, she knew I could make records. And Punishment of Luxury was another one I did that was kind of a cult hit thing. But so she sent me over to make this record with them, and that was interesting because I hadn't worked out at that point how important it was to do a proper rehearsal with the band.
Right.
And so I went into the studio with them, and we'd set it all up in a top studio in Toronto, and we were getting the sound, and then the band are doing a run through, and I said to the engineer, "Look, can you turn the kick drum up? I can't hear the kick drum." And he said, "Well, listen to this." And he solos the kick drum, Mike. and I could hear more of the guide vocal 10 feet away on the kick drum mic than I could hear kick drum. And I thought, what do you mean?
Right.
And the thing was that they were really, a college band. They were a real art school. And the drummer was the younger brother of Mark Gain, who was the leader of the band and kind of in charge of things. And I knew there was just no way I was going to say, well, get me the top session drummer in Toronto, because that was not going to run. And so I went through the motions, and we spent a day and a half recording it and mixing it. And meanwhile, I rang up Carol in London and said, look, I'm afraid we do have a problem. And I said, what I want to do is to come back and spend some time working on the arrangement and working on the parts, because, he's just not strong enough, and he's just not really he's trying to play too much as well. So I need to sort of sort out the drums especially. But so what we arranged was to come back 3 or 4 weeks later, and I went and spent 3 weeks in a rehearsal room. And before I went back, I said to the drummer, and that I told him this exercise that Pierre, the Gong drummer, had told me many years previously, when we were talking about kick drums and how I would lock in on the kick, and that's the essence of funky soul groove play, right? And Pierre had told me this exercise that his music teacher had told him about how to get more muscle into your kick drum, how to build up the muscles that play the kick drum. He said you put a standard house pick on the ground, on its side, on its short, narrow side, and you put your foot on top, and then pressing down with your heel, you rock the whole brick up and down in the air, just pressing back with your heel. And he said that strengthens the muscles that you need to be able to really go boom, 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 with any force. And I said, oh, that's fantastic. Who knew? 10 years.
Yes.
But
The humble brick
that I needed to tell this guy. And I told him this, and I said, listen, this comes from a guy who studied, the Conservatoire in Strasbourg. It's a real exercise, and you must do this because it's really important. And I got him to do it, made it really serious. And he did it. And when I came back, a month later, and he really worked at it, his kick drum was much stronger, but he was also doing all the things that young drummers do, where they, when they do a fill, they rush it, because they're sort of too excited. They land early, and then they're doing late, and they're trying to lean back, and then a lot of little things that So I kind of worked through all of the whole album instead of just that one track, and tidied it up and said, look, don't do that fill there. If it needs a fill, we can overdub. Okay. And if you really think it needs what, we'll do this, and we'll leave a hole, and then we'll overdub the tom there, and we'll do that. But mostly you've just got to play that really. If you listen to that album, and people have noticed it and said to me, it's really sweet, the drummer's just going boop, bop, boop, bop, boop, bop, boop, bop, boop, boop, and again. And I said, yes, he is, isn't he?
Yes, absolutely.
I wonder how that came about. Anyway, I did. I made him just simplify everything, and it makes the record. It had a charm, really. But he was certainly, the alternative was just flooding all over the place, and, it was not going to sound very professional.
No.
So, isn't that fascinating how these little pieces of information?
Well, God, absolutely incredible. Well, it's 45 years later, we still know that song. The other band that I was very curious about that you worked with, which were quite different to the chart-topping singles bands, was the Consat Angels, because they were a band who I liked a lot. How did you manage to sort of find yourself working with such a sort of slightly indie band from the kind of early 80s?
It actually came through my management, who was Zomba Records, Zomba and Jive Records.
Right, Jive, yes.
But because I think they were signed to a smaller label they had that was run by a very cool guy whose name has just slipped me again, but he had a label called Radar, I think. Anyway, they end up on the Jive catalogue, and Clive Calder, who was Jive Records and Zomba Music and that, who by the way retired to the Cayman Islands as the sole owner after having sold it to BMG for
Yes.
$3 billion.
Nice.
Lived happily ever after. But I know some good stories about him, though. He did set up a $500 million fund in South Africa, where he came from, for musicians, young musicians. And that's alive and running, and very kind and very good. A lot of other good things Clive did. He, was very musical. But nonetheless, he was the one. And funnily enough, I mean, Joey Marotta, the drummer?
No.
He played on Peter Gabriel again. Games Without Frontiers, that whole album.
Oh, yes, because my brother was obsessed with those first three albums.
He also did that album by not playing cymbals, remember, so they could use compressed gated ambience.
Right.
Do it. And, they all claim they invented it, but I think they all had a part in it. But Jerry played drums on an album I did for a Canadian artist called Larry Gowan, who you've never heard of, but who was quite a big star in the late 80s in Canada only. But Jerry did the drums for that album. And when I met him, he said, you produced one of my favorite albums ever, which is Concert Angels. That same. One of those albums that no one bought, but a lot of people go, "No, it's an amazing album." And I go, "Yeah."
Right. So Jerry the drummer was one that Peter Gabriel tracked, Games Without Frontiers, and those early albums.
Yeah, he's his go-to drummer for years.
Right. So so then you're working with the Concert Angels, a very different sort of setup here, isn't it?
I know. I mean, they had a great song. I mean, Independence Day is a classic. It's a brilliant.
It is a classic. We love it. And this is the album Land that you're working on.
Sorry?
Land is the album that you're working on with them?
Yeah, I think that's what it is. I don't know.
And they do Independence Day, don't they?
Yes, yeah.
Yes. And what were they like to work with?
They were very nice, I'm just trying to remember now. It was strange because in the middle of it all, my father died, and he was living in Australia, and so they knew it would happen, and then because I was on the phone to him a couple of times, and then he died, and I said, look, I just have to go to the funeral, and they were so lovely, and they said yes, of course, and so we agreed they would work on a couple of tracks that were not completed, and they did a really great track called Mr. Memory, which was while I was away, and that's one of my favorite tracks on the album, but it's very beautiful. So yes, it was emotional, and it was, but it was kind of, for me, coloured by that. And when I came back, it was one of those, I went out for a week, did the funeral, all those intense things that happened around my brother and two sisters and my mother, and then came back and carried on doing the album. And that's such a big wrench because combined with the time lags thing plus the emotion, I found myself in the studio at like 8 o'clock at night, and when the sort of a swarm of bees descends on your brain and you cannot keep awake and you cannot focus, and they were great. They just said, just go and have a snooze and lie down. And I went off that room in the studio and had a rest, and I'd come back an hour or two later, and then I could carry on for a couple of hours more. It was very difficult for that reason. So it's a strange time, but I did love that album. I tell you, one of those albums that you think, that was, I'm really pleased with it. Just unfortunately, the greater public I didn't quite agree.
No, I think that was their fourth studio album. And one artist that I loved in the 70s and in the 80s is Joan Armatrading. And I remember her early albums in the 70s, and then she did The Key, which had that single Drop the Pilot. You work on her kind of next album, Secret,
Yeah,
don't you?
no, I
What
didn't
was
have a
that
hit.
like?
Huh?
What was that like? Because she'd obviously had that massive commercial success with Drop the Pilot.
Yeah, it was complicated. Joan is. I mean, I love her to death. She's a great artist, and I was just really thrilled to work with her. Uh, by this time, though, she was very much knew exactly what she wanted, and really, and I said it to her. I said, the thing is, you don't really want a producer, Joan. What you want is just somebody to manage the project and keep everybody, turning up. Um, and she never used a producer again. But she hasn't had it since then either. But I think
No.
she didn't have none of those songs were that as good as Drop the Particle, but especially, I mean, to me, Love and Affection is still one of the all-time.
Yes.
For me, it's Desert Island is that one. But I mean, I loved Willow, and I loved Walk Under Ladders, and
Me, Myself, I.
yeah. But to me, it's still nothing topped Love and Affection. But there were some gorgeous things. There's a lovely moment too with Joe Jackson, where she and Joe did this song where Joe plays the piano and she sings, and we did it totally live in the studio, and we set it up that way so that it was just the two of them, and nobody in the building or the room. It was very. They had candles. It was just a very emotional, romantic thing for the two gay people. But that is, to me, is a gorgeous track.
Yes.
But obviously not sort of single material.
No, not at all, actually.
Speaking about, she's difficult, but I managed to work with her, and she really wanted me to do what I do, which is I'm very patient with vocal, and I can take half a dozen vocal tracks and then work through them and then go through them word by word and line by line. And she loves that. And she just, she let me do it. She wanted me to do that. And so I go through it all and we discuss these in, enormous detail. But, so in terms of the performance, I think it was all good. But I saw her, I did a TV thing a couple of years back, and I saw her then, and she's always very, very nice. I saw her at the launch of that, and she was we met her outside, and we had a really nice chat. She's very kind, and she's like, lovely. I mean, what's funny in that movie is that the documentary is that basically, they do. I do say, I told her she doesn't need a producer, and sure enough, she hasn't used one since. But again, it's about how do you keep writing hit songs? And
yes, well, that is tricky.
Producers don't make a hit song. Show me a song that, you can blow a song that could have been a hit by not getting it right, but you can't turn a song that can't be a hit into a hit. And I don't think I failed on any songs. I don't think any of those songs were hits.
No, but then what about a song that is boggling still because it's sort of so popular in America is "The Flock of Seagulls." I ran so far away. I mean, did you think, God, this when you first heard the demo? Did you think this is definitely sprinkled the fairy dust on this? This is going to run and run, or did you think
that was the song that could be the hit on the album for sure? And and also my manager Clive Calder. He said, that's the one without a doubt, you get that one and the rest doesn't matter.
But did you have to do, because I did this producer who shaped a lot of the 90s sound with that kind of rock, done Soul Asylum and Systems of Down and Marilyn Manson and early Red Hot Chili Peppers. And he mostly only worked on one album with the band, these bands from the 90s. But they were the albums that had the songs, but he had a fraught time and the band never wanted to work with him again. But he would often just say, these songs aren't good enough, you got to come back and write something a bit better. And he, so there was always a lot of tension, but they wrote the famous songs. Did you ever feel that with, like a band, like A Flock of Seagulls, I Ran? Did you think, this needs a bit more shape? This is. Do you as a
Yeah, I'll tell you
producer?
what that needed. The song actually was very well structured. It was all there in the arrangement and the composition. What was a big problem with that song, and that song, I used to do a lecture about this when I was teaching a lot, because I think, that vocal is a construction of genius, and I take full credit because I knew how important it was. And the backing track was great. They played really well. Again, of a drummer, I have to say, he's not a very technically accomplished drummer, but he knew to play that way already. And somebody pointed this out. I hadn't noticed. I think it was the engineer who pointed it out to me, that if you listen closely, you can't really tell, but he can't play the hi-hat and the cymbal at the same time, right? The hi-hat and the snare at the same time. And so he's going, boom, chick, bap, chick, boom, chick, bap, chick, boom, chick, bap, chick, boom, chick, bap, chick. And he's not going tap, bap, bap, which is what a drummer does normally. Boom,
Yes.
boom, so the hat's going on all the beats. He's only playing in between the other beats. And you don't notice it because there's lots of other stuff going on. But if you think about it, it actually gives all of the songs this, again, a strange loping feel. It's just entirely what he did and how he was. And I worked that band, I rehearsed that band. The big problem was the vocal, because he's not a great singer. And I tell you, I do what I do normally, which is like I put down, I go for a vocal take, and I think, okay, well, maybe the first verse has got something. Let's keep that, and then do for another one, and then second verse has something. Then there may be a line in the third verse, and then we do a third take, and I get to say 5 takes like this, and then
Right.
I might go back and drop in on the first take on the bits I definitely don't need. But then I'll spend hours, I promise you. 5 hours. I could spend 6 hours going through it line by line, and then comping up, bouncing each line that I think is any good, and then I think that word's quite right, so I'll use this word for that line from this take. And I can do that. I'm an absolute obsessive compulsive, and this is all analog tape here, so we're bouncing from 5 tracks onto one to build up this one composite track. And then I do a rough mix and I take it home, because you can't be sure after you've heard it that many times, right? So the next morning before I come in, I go put it on and play it at my home, and I listen and I go, doesn't cut it. That vocal doesn't cut it. So we go back in and I say they're going to do another one. And so we do another 5 takes, right? And I go through it, and I go line by line, and then I drop in and just this until I've got the best of the rest I can get out of that. But I did that, I tell you, till I had probably I'd say 5 takes, each of which was made up of at least 5 takes, and some have taken of more. And then I'd make a comp of that lot, and then a comping of that, until I've now got something like 50 takes here, right? And I'm then taking it home and listening and going, it's not good enough. And so, I'm not doing this every single day. I'm going back and doing a guitar solo, or we might do, bits that need to be done on that song, or we do this bit, I might do the vocal there and then come back to it. I just knew I had to get it right. And if that vocal didn't work, the whole thing didn't work. And if they didn't work, the album didn't, I knew that the song was good, but the vocal performance had to be credible. And then, I tell you what happened. And in the end, I had, I think about 100 tapes compiled into 5 compilations of compilations of compilations, right? And then I was trying double tracking by putting 2 up and one below it. And finally, I did a thing that I did actually on Souvenir, but it was much more easy because there were just lots of good takes, so just the texture wasn't good. Here, I'd finally got these things. So I did that. And what that vocal is one main vocal, which is a compilation of all those takes, right? And then there's 4 other takes, which are all compilations of other takes. And they are all sitting So about 5 dB behind the main vocal, but there's 4 other ones. So what you hear is the character of the first one, but what you get is the texture of these other ones. And if you listen to it, you might think it was auto-tuned and heavily treated, but it's purely that process. And this is 1982 we're talking about here. So, we didn't have auto-tune, I mean, God knows. But because of it, we've got a different texture that really works because it's sort of robotic almost. And so this whole element of them being this kind of, electro modern, but, people say, oh, it was kind of soulless, but the guitar gives it the rock. And that's why we knew it was good for America because, the Americans found people like Orchestra in the Dark or Depeche Mode, they thought they're cold, they're kind of electronic and cold. And, we want some, blood, but the Americans like some guitar. And that guitar he was such a great guitarist, Paul Reynolds. And he also was so good, he just, plugged up. He had a chorus echo and he plugged his guitar and went, and just easy, just a great musician. They could all play.
Amazing.
The vocal was just, I tell you, that was a miracle.
Yes. Well, I'm now going to listen to that with a little bit more appreciation. I think he just knocked it out in a couple of hours. So, but no, not hours. So
they blew it. They did a live radio show here, and which they should never have done. If they'd done it, they should have got me. The managers were incredibly stupid. They did so many errors, and with that band. But they let them do an hour-long live program, and David Bowie said, "Oh, they sounded like the most interesting new band I'd heard in years. I thought they're amazing." And then I listened to that live show, and I'm afraid I don't think that I can sing. I mean, he was kind of brutal and right. They should not have let him put the rules.
How does he get on? Because he still performs, doesn't he?
He does. You get away with it live because he's probably got double tracking machines nowadays and various bits, to cover it up, and who knows how they,
How was the second album? What was the second? Oh, did you work
that
on?
was frustrating because again, they didn't really have a hit single. They had one song that they'd done themselves with what's it called, Telecommunication, I think, and they'd done as their own single that Bill. What's his name? Bill, guitarist from up north.
Oh, Bill. Oh, God. Is he in the band?
Yeah. He's not in the band. No, he's a kind of 70s proggy rocker guitarist. I'm sorry, all these senior moments.
Well, that's okay. God, it's hard. I mean, how does that compare then? Because obviously you're a bit of a hit machine. Now, Blancmange, Living on the Ceiling, another one of those interesting sort of tracks that sort of we loved so much during that period. What was that process? Was that a little bit easier?
Well, it was a bit of a funny one in a way because they were great, those guys. I had a lot of fun with them making that. And we've done some tracks before that were, I think, really nice songs, but not the hit that was. But that partly was also the A&R guy, again, whose name will come back to me. He went on to become a very successful music industry guy. Sorry, I'm having all these notes. But I produced it, I recorded it all, and we did it, and we were doing it with all synthesizers. They were a synthesizer duo, and we did it like that. And part of the thing is they got this really nice synthy sounding sitar, and also synthy sounding tabla sounds, right? That were all really nice.
Yes.
And then I finished it, mixed it, and then I went off to Australia, and I think to bury my father's, take his ashes to Fiji, I think. But anyway, while I was there, they rang up and said they wanted to add real sitar to it, and could I come back and do it? And I couldn't because I was involved in various things with my mother. I was committed to producing Hunters and Collectors in Melbourne. There's various reasons I couldn't do it, and they really wanted to do it right then and they couldn't wait a month. And I just said, look, I'm sorry, I just can't get back until this time. So they ended up getting Dennis Weinrich, who did it. He always apologizes to me because he went and re-recorded, he added real actual sitar to it and real tablas to it, and then remixed it, right? I mean, the rest of it was, I did vocal there, I'd done it, as I'd done it, and arrangement was as I'd done it. But I thought it was a bit odd because the whole point was it was synthesizers, and this, I thought it was typical of an A&R man to go, let's put real sitar on it, You don't want those sounds like sitar, why don't we put a real sitar? I don't know why. They always sort of thought that was the kind of point of it, was synthesizers that sounded like Indian instruments. But so yes, so there was a little, I didn't care. I got the royalties, it's still my production and all that. And look, the thing is, what's there is mine, but I didn't add the sitar and I didn't add the tabla.
Right, because that must have been so kind of weird, actually.
Yeah, so nothing. I was nothing without that.
Nothing. No, absolutely. And then, sort of fast forward, and you then sort of develop an academic career and life, don't you? You get a PhD on, record production in the late O years, and you then become a lecturer. So what happens? I mean, obviously, from 1979 to 1985, massively doing production. What happens after that
Still doing
period?
productions until about 92. I did a Spanish band called Tango. It sold a few 100,000. Yeah, I mean, just not in the UK, but I did a Canadian actor, did an American actor, did okay. But yeah, it all tails off, and I wasn't getting the huge hits anymore. I also deliberately chose not to go abroad for a lot of the later 80s. Because of my children who were growing up, and I realized I was missing the golden years, as I call them, from 2 to 7. Those years are where they're just the little darlings, and that I didn't want to, I'd spent a long project it ended up with me spending a long project in 91 in Berlin. And I completely, just didn't want to do that anymore. So I tailed off really, and it's very, demanding. I just did, again, I just wasn't getting hits. I wasn't getting the big, the work either. So that I started lecturing in the late 90s, but it was only towards 2005, I think, that I was doing equivalent of 2 or 3 days a week up in Glamorgan in Wales, University of South Wales. I've changed the name. But the guy who ran the course there, a lovely man, who died this year, and who got me to come up and do guest lecturing there, and then he got me to do more, and then I go up, spend a day and a night, and stay over, and come back, do some more the next day, and come back, and then at some point his head of department said, "Oh, Howlett doesn't have a degree," and Jim Barrett, his name was.
Yes.
He said, "Well, no, but he's got hit records and a Grammy, and chairman of the Producers Guild. He's had a rather successful career." And this guy, it was in the School of Electronics, and he was kind of very old school. He said, "Well, he's got to have a degree." And so Jim said, "Well, you could do one by portfolio. You could do, you just, do a very basic bachelor's degree if you wanted, based on your portfolio." But he said, with your portfolio, you could do a PhD if you wanted to, and you'd only have to write about 20,000 words. But so I looked into it and I thought about it, and I thought, I really would like to do a proper PhD where I really analyze the whole process. I just started, I don't know if you read it, but it's a really, people say it's a good read, but I couldn't get a publisher. But it is there. You can get it from the University of South Wales Library, or you can get it from Queensland University of Technology. You've got, you can get a download of it. Well, I can send you one. But because I just thought, look, there's no people try to write books about what is a record producer, and you get. I know Richard Burgess pretty well, and I think his book's great. Here we go. I've got the cough now. It's come over the microphone.
Yes, yes.
It really is that.
The dry cough.
You look at what they say. Well, there's this kind of producer and that kind, and he has his own categories and the rest of it. And I thought, well, what I'd like to do is kind of have this universal theory of what a producer is, and the producer is a kind of function. And I thought the most universal way I could think of was like a producer's function is to be the interface between the creative process that takes place in the studio and the technology that manifests it as a recording. And your producer is the go-between, is the interface. It's I thought the nexus. That's a very academic sounding name, But that's what you're. So you're this interface between the creative thing, which is the artist, the performance, the vision, and the realization of the vision through the technology. And so that's initially my idea. And then, of course, as you do with these things, and you start to research and read, and look at the various philosophies of things and how these work out. And I thought, well, really, there's three things going on. There's the creative thing, which is the artist and the composition, the creative performance and the composition, which is the music or that becomes the content. There's the technology that turns it into reproducible data, and technology that's involved with that. So that's the engineering. But there's the arrangement, of course, which is part of the creative side as well. But there's a third element, and that is the industry that actually makes it possible in the first place, because you need a structure that allows this process to take place. And it's something I did learn when I tried to form a record label in the 90s. I missed that bit out, didn't I? I did. I made a record label. I released about 3 records on it too. And that was successful. But that's where I learned the bit that you don't know, because you're in there in the studio and you're working with the artists and the gear in the studio, and you're making this recording, and it's all lovely. You made a whole record, and then the record company takes it, and sometimes it was a hit, and sometimes it wasn't, and you don't know, And it wasn't until I later learned that there's the marketing and promotion meetings, and there's the budget, and there's how do you sell it to the sales force, and then there's the getting it to market, and how do you get the press, and all those ingredients. That's what a record company's job is to actually the making of a record. Great, that's what I can do. I'm a musician, and also the technology is all stuff I'm happy with. So that's where I realized that but you're still there. You're still negotiating between them with their ambition, which is to have a hit record, and then the artist's ambition, which is to have a hit record, but to be admired and respected for it.
Yes.
And your ambition is to sell a lot of records and be respected for it, but also to manage the technology of doing it. But this role where you're the hub, the nexus. I talked to a lot of different people. I mean, Steve Power, who produced Robbie Williams, and Steve had engineered a bunch of stuff with me. He's a very lovely engineer and extremely nice man, and got very, successful with Robbie. But I had a long chat to him about it. He said, yeah, I think of it like the hub on a bicycle. You're the center, and all these different things come through you, and they come out there. And so that's good. It's okay. It still works with my Nexus thing. But different producers, a lot of producers, John Leckie, very good friend, talked about it all. And so that's why I wanted it to just be a kind of a simple grand unifying theory of what as a producer produces this nexus that interfaces with these things, and that comes out there, and so who knows. But anyway, it was a way of
and you got your PhD. So then you also lectured in Wales, and also the Thames Valley University. Then you became the head of music at Queensland University in Brisbane.
Technology, yeah, QUT in Brisbane. Well, that
Yes.
came out of the lecturing, and doing a paper at the Art of Record.
Did you have to move to Australia again then?
We did. But I mean, I kept. I had two houses here in Acton, and one of which was a rental property, and the other one, I left my children, who are now grown up, living in, and to destroy, as I spent a bit of money making it have six bedrooms. They had three of them and three rental, and then this house which I rented as well. So all that time was good, and we were paying quite low rent in Brisbane compared to this. I was on a great salary as well at the university because I was head of the school, and so it was a good time, and it was good. And so, but I have to say that a lot of the cliches are true about why academics are so bitter. It's because the cliche that there's so little to play for is the joke. That's why they're vicious and nasty, and there was a lot of nastiness going on that
Yes.
I realised for a long time, that and envy, because I had the career they all dreamed of. It's just tragic, and I come from Sydney, and as a musician that went out to meet the world and came back, a conquering hero. But they were all bitter and twisted because they were all musicians who hadn't had the
moment, no. So what have you been up to in the last 5 years? What are you working on now?
Very little. Mostly I do podcasts and interviews.
Right.
I have to say I've been doing a few gigs here and there. When I got very involved in remixing Universal Records, ended up owning a third of all the record companies in the world, Sony and BMG and the rest. But they ended up owning Virgin, and they had a division called Archive, and so they came up with brilliant ideas of how to re-monetize Archive, and they came to us, and Steve and I were going to do it, and then Steve had some illness, and I took it over and I did it, and so I mixed hundreds of hours of live multi-tracks that were left hanging around in the archive from the 70s,
right,
from that period, and so the Man of Mobile came down to a place called Roanne in the Clermont-Ferrand, in France, and it was a hippie rock club that we recorded a set there that was really well recorded, and just after we'd done the Angels album, and the Man Mobile came and recorded Gong live in Hyde Park in '74, which had never been released.
So you're working on the Gong archives at the moment?
Well, I did that, and we ended up with a box set which had the whole trilogy plus Shamal remastered.
Yeah.
And these unreleased live albums all packaged up and put into a thing, and we put a book together, and took control of the whole package and the artwork and everything ourselves. So Johnny did it with me, basically.
Brilliant.
And it all came out, and they sold out first run of about 5,000, and said, that's all we're going to do. That's fine. Oh, we didn't expect it. We were happy with that. And then they pressed another 5,000, which they've sold out now. And they said, we're really happy with that. We don't want to say. And Johnny knows, but we can sell 20, 30,000 of those. Tomorrow. It's just it's not big in their terms. It's not big enough, but it's also not. No, I don't know why. I don't understand. I mean, I met the head guy there and sat next to him at the Prog Awards, and said, there's a lot of people out there still follow this. And of course, there's a Gong playing, as you know. I mean,
yes,
just done a tour of America, which is all in keeping with the grand vision.
Yeah, so this is good. So what have you got lined? Have you got anything projects apart from doing podcasts and interviews, have you got anything other musical projects that you've got on the horizon?
Now, look, I'm very frustrated because I had a lovely band, a jamming band, that did a bunch of gigs from about 2001 until 2012, I think it was. And I had this wonderful guitarist called Steve Higgins, who he could play anything. It was like me. We could just go and do a gig for 2 hours with no music and just improvise it and just begin. He could do Hendrix and he could do funky blues stuff.
Yes.
He was very improvisational, and we just clicked and really worked well. And initially we had a drummer, Eddie Sayer, who was Leo Sayer's brother, as it happens, but he's completely different. He as a gong therapist, he will heal you with.
Oh, good.
But a very lovely drummer, but he fell out with Higgins, and then we for a long time had this very nice drummer, Steve Cassidy, who was in one of the Planet Gong and bands, and he was in Here and Now, if you know them.
Yes.
He was a lovely drummer, but he's now moved. He used to live near me in Acton, but he just moved down into Kent. And it's really frustrating because, it's too much trouble. And then, last year I did a bunch of festivals with a band formed by a guy who used to play guitar at Hawkwind for about 3 months in the 70s.
Oh, what's his name?
And then it's Bruce Welch.
Yes.
Which is the same name as Bruce Welch of the Shadows, but he's not that Bruce Welch of the Shadows, who everybody from Eric Clapton to me say, that was the first guitarist I ever tried to copy.
Yes.
Bruce Welch, he played all those safaris. But this Bruce Welch is a very nice man who actually was a sort of roadie guitarist. And when Rob, what's the name? What are their names? Two guitarists of the other one, a very unpleasant person. I shouldn't say that. Take out all these unpleasantnesses.
Yes, I won't. Well,
how many people listen to these anyway?
100,000.
Well, people tell people too. They listen again, and then they'll tell somebody who tells somebody else.
Yes,
anyway, he just around the time they had Silver Machine, so he came in, and the other guy left. He was so disgusted they were having a pop record hit single, and then after a few months, he came and heard them play live and thought, "Oh, no, it's quite good, really." And then so he said, "Kick him out. I'm going back." So that was his one brief time. But Bruce had a band called, and they used to play with Nick Turner, the saxophone.
Yes, of course.
Who sadly died 2 years ago, who was a lovely guy, very good friend. I did an album with Nick, I played on an album called Sphinx.
Yes.
Nick goes and holds up in the pyramid, and Hillage came and took it all and structured it into songs and got me to come and play bass. And I did a tour with Nick in that band called Sphinx, and we'd all dress up as mummies with complete white body stockings and bandages wrapped around our heads. The whole band looked like mummies. No, Nick was a real character, a very nice guy, and sad. But he had this band that used to play at Glastonbury at one of the Greenfield stages.
Oh, sort of the Avalon stage.
And there are a number of those stages up there. But anyway, this band formed around Nick, and then youth got involved and mixed a bunch of stuff and created an album out of it. And then sadly Nick died, and the album came out, and then they've sort of been trying to promote it. And the bass player they had left for various complicated reasons, and Basil Brooks, who played synthesizer with Zorch and with Steve Hillage band and with my psychedelic improvisational band, he rang me up and said, "Oh, we need a bass player. We're going to do these gigs. They're only festivals." And so I did in a small world festival, and I did half a dozen. Last summer I did 2 gigs at the Green Gathering, and one at Cosfest, and we did a memorial gig at the Glastonbury Civic town hall, so that
Yes.
in the centre of town at Glastonbury. We've done a couple of other gigs, but then I just got very ill last year. Ended up in hospital with an unidentified virus or possibly bacterium. They never figured it out, but it wiped me out. And so I was sort of not very well for quite a while until really till about March this year. It took me a long time to recover. It's one of those out of the blue things that they never identify, but slowly fixes itself, and
Back on.
it's all systems go again. But I have to say that I just thought, look, I just don't want to play that music. It's very rocky. It's sort of it's kind of fun for a couple of gigs to go.
Yes.
And I get the pick out and do a bit of that for a while. But I'm really a funky groove player, and it's what I like to do. What I've been doing, I've been going through a mountain of jams I've got, and figuring out tracks to put up, because my daughter actually, who lives over in Hackney Wick, and she said some friends were asking what your music was like, and so I went and looked and found some amazing stuff on YouTube, which was a gig at a party that we did in about 2012, just before this guitarist died. And there's 3 or 4 really good tracks there, and I thought, that's really good. So I've taken the audio from those, they're all recorded just straight onto an iPhone. And it's astonishingly good quality. It was out in the back garden of this party of my sister-in-law, a big party, but it was just amazingly good, and we played really well. And it's all very clear, and so I'm taking the audio from that and sort of tidying it up a bit, and I want to put it up on a website and have it available.
Oh, fantastic!
There's some sites or other that's got one of my jammy band things from my studio here, and it was #1 in London for funk, a couple of months ago. So I don't know how many people.
Oh, this is very exciting. Yes,
about 500 followers on that little channel. So I thought, why don't I just put some more stuff out there, just and tidy it up? I just haven't got the drive at the moment. I've been looking for a drummer and a guitarist, and there's a guitarist that I was put in touch with, but he's in Scotland until the end of August.
Right, that's a little bit banana.
He's agreed to come and have a jam, and we'll see how we get on. But I don't think he's going to be right. And then there's a drummer that is a nice guy who's, and I just don't know what he plays like, because hasn't got any proper recordings. But he's in Brighton, and so what's the point of having a fucking drummer who lives in Brighton? I have to schlep down there. So until I find a drummer who lives up the road and a guitarist who lives around the corner, I'm thinking I might just keep pottering around in my studio.
Yes, I think that's true. Look, Mike, I'm going to have to go to bed.
It's very late. It's nearly 11 o'clock. I can tell you, you must have realised I could talk for England.
Well, no, it's good. It's good. I mean, I think it's been fun. I really wanted to capture your 80s period of production, really, because I thought that was kind of an area that I was particularly interested in. So,
we can always do this again, but and you can see what you've got from this one, and just use what's useful, because
yes,
and I know I waffle.
No, but I mean the well, that little bit with the police, but also the 80s production stuff. I'll have to go back and listen to some of these records with slightly different ears now, especially the lyrics.
Listen to that Flock of Seagulls track. I mean, the guy was a dick, but that track is a great track, and it earned me a lot of money. But it was in La La Land, that movie. It was in the soundtrack of that, so that always.
Happy days.
Few pennies home too.
We yes, it's always fun. Right, look, I better hit the bed. So
no, good. But yes, I said, look, anytime we'll work it out, we'll find a time. But as I said, I'm off on Friday, back the following probably Monday. But we can get together again in a few weeks just work it out and tell me what you want.
Yeah, okay, look, thanks a lot. Have a good night's sleep.
Pleasure to talk.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
And that, dear listener, is the end of the interview. Congratulations if you got that far. This has been the C86 show. David Eastaugh. That was massive thank you to Mike Howlett for giving me the time. If you want to contact me, you can on any of the social media platforms and sites, I suppose. Yes, just do C86 show. And also all these interviews have been archived on Spotify, iTunes and Podbean. Anyway, have a great week. Stay safe.